A really huge portion of these study tips you'll get from professors and other people who want you to be better in school, and maybe that you'll find here on YouTube, are really basic. They'll tell you to sit up front in class, scan your textbooks instead of reading every single chapter, bring your cat to class to reduce stress, and so you get to meet the nice folks at Animal Control. And these tips, while they're good, they're really, really useful, they are basic. And maybe you're like me. You're a classical, detail-driven nerd. Like when I play fighting games, I want to learn all the frame data and every single moveset and all the matchups instead of just playing the game and having fun, quote unquote. So applying to study, I'm the same way, and I want to find really advanced tips, ways to sort of hack my learning, things that usually don't come up when you get your basic study tips. So to that end, maybe you're like me and want to get some advanced study tips, and I am happy to oblige. And in this video, I'm going to give you 8 of those advanced study tips. So let's get started. So the first tip is to use the Corson technique when asking professors for help. Now, Dale Corson was the 8th president of Cornell University. Yes, the same Cornell University that spawned the famous Cornell note-taking system. And he was also a chemistry professor, and he said that students in chemistry and other science and math programs often have to really work to crack problems one sentence at a time as they go through their textbooks or problem sets. But sometimes eventually you get to a point where you just can't crack the problem on your own and you need to ask for help, right? So you go to your professor, and what Dale Corson wants you to think about before you actually talk to your professor is pause and ask yourself, what is it that I don't understand? Like, truly, what is it that I don't understand? And what he wants you to get away from is this thing that a lot of students do where they go to their professor and with a general wave of the hand, as he says, they say, I don't understand what I'm looking at. Like, this is just confusing to me. I don't get it. And what he wants you to do is avoid that. Rather, pick apart the problem one sentence at a time and figure out the exact point at which you don't get what's going on. So right here, I understand this process makes sense to me, but here is where I'm getting a little shaky and I just don't get this. After that, I'm cool. When you can pinpoint that, you're going to impress your professor with your preparation and the amount of effort you put into the problem. So you get some brownie points there, but you're also working to practice the art of recognizing confusion and following it down to its actual source. And this will help you immensely in all of your learning going forward. Tip number 2 is to learn facts quickly with a technique called spaced repetition. Now, spaced repetition is the art of studying things at increasingly bigger and bigger intervals of time. And it's a very efficient way to study, but it's also, it takes advantage of the way your brain works. And basically, spaced repetition is a system where you'll study something, and if you know that individual fact very well, you will not see it for quite a while. But the facts that you don't know well, you're going to see them more and more frequently. And the way that this works on a brain level is that you are trying to recall information. You're forcing your brain to pull it out at the closest time possible to when you are about to forget it. So your brain actually has to work as hard as it possibly can to recall this information, and it encodes it better. So it's more efficient and you can actually learn a lot faster. Now, the best way to take advantage of this is to use an SRS or spaced repetition software to do your studying for you instead of using index cards or something. Now, when I was studying Japanese, and I will be doing this again soon, I used one called WaniKani that was very, very efficient and helped me learn hundreds of kanji and Japanese vocab words. But there is actually a free and generalized one called Anki, and you can find it at ankisrs.net, where you can actually create your own card sets for any type of data that you think you would want to study with SRS, or you can actually find shared card decks from people who have already made things. So definitely check that out. I think the preparation aspect of making your own card decks is very useful, but simply going through and studying them using spaced repetition is usually going to be more efficient than using just typical linear flashcard study methods on paper. All right, tip number 3, and we're getting a little bit more advanced here. So this one is to try out the method of Loki for memorization. Now, the method of Loki goes back to the Greek and Roman times, and it is a memorization technique that has been used by memory champs for a long time. And it essentially takes advantage of your brain's ability to remember spatial information very well. It's all about visualization. And the classic way to do it is to associate certain sets of the set of data you're trying to memorize, certain groups of that with different rooms of a house. So let me give you an example. This is the kanji for king in Japanese. And the pronunciation, the way that you say king in Japanese is O. And O is kind of a It's really simple pronunciation. It doesn't really lend itself too well to mnemonics, which is a shame because mnemonics is a great way to learn kanji. Now, what if I wanted to adapt the method of Loki to learning this kanji along with lots of others? What does a king sit on? A throne, or as we could say, the toilet. And I am not averse to using 5-year-old humor here. And what do you say when you smell the toilet? Oh, yeah. Work with me here. Also, the kanji for king kind of looks like a towel rack, so I could associate king with the bathroom in a house. And if I really wanted to make this study technique useful for me, I would go into the bathroom and I would put up flashcards on the walls, and then I'd walk through my house and study this. Now, the method of Loki is kind of difficult, or Loki is kind of difficult to use. It's sort of an advanced technique, and usually you're going to be better off with SRS or mnemonics if you have a smaller set of data. But if you've got a lot to work with and nothing else has worked for you, it's something that you can try. Tip number 4 is to hack acrasia. So acrasia is a term that has been written about for centuries, and it goes back to Plato, and it's essentially a lack of command over oneself. And there's another even more complex term called picoeconomics, which talks about this hyperbolic discounting that we do. Essentially, we discount the value of a task the more it is delayed, the more the reward is pushed off into the future, which in short, means that we tend to procrastinate and do sort of fun things that don't really align with our values in the short term, and we avoid doing things that really do line up with our values because the reward is delayed. So the way you can hack acrasia, or sort of avoid becoming a victim to it, is twofold. One, use a commitment device. Bind yourself to getting your task done on time. And the way I do this is by using an app called Beeminder, which I've talked about before. I absolutely love Beeminder, and I've been using it to ensure that I publish 3 things a week for quite a while now. And if you look at my graph here, which I'll throw up, you can see that I have actually been publishing much more frequently than I was before. And it's largely because I use a commitment device to bind myself to do this. Now, another way that you can sort of hack acrasia, the second part of the fold, is to add a shorter term reward to completing a task. In the classic way, you've probably seen this image before, is to put gummy bears on your textbook, and as you read paragraphs, you allow yourself to eat them. But you can do all sorts of other things. Let yourself watch an episode of Game of Thrones once you finish an assignment, or maybe use a tool like Habit RPG and give yourself some experience and gold when you finish the study problem set or something. Just find a way to make sure that the only reward isn't that far off delayed one that causes acrasia. All right, tip number 5 is to improve the Pomodoro technique. And you may have heard of the Pomodoro technique. Everyone talks about it, but in case you haven't, it's simply a technique where you set a timer for about 25 minutes, classically, and then you work only on one task during that 25-minute session. And I think a lot of people do this, and it's very useful, but there are some areas for improvement that I don't think a lot of people take advantage of. So let me just rapid fire give them to you. So number 1, and I've talked about how much I'm a fan of the Beeminder app. The Beeminder blog is also a good resource for productivity techniques and experiments. And one of the things that they talk about is this thing they do called talks. Well, a talk is essentially a Pomodoro session, except for they use about 45 minutes and then take 15-minute breaks instead of the classic 25-minute, 5-minute break structure. So the tip here is to experiment with the time intervals. Don't just set yourself to 25 minutes and assume that that's the only potential interval that you could study at. Find what works for you. And the other one is to put a piece of paper next to you during your Pomodoro session, and whenever anything comes up that distracts you, maybe a phone call or the urge to check Facebook or something, write it down. Now, this lets you do 2 things. One, you can remember what the distraction was, and if it happened to be something urgent, you can take care of it during your break time. But 2, as you continue to do lots of Pomodoro sessions over months and months, you start to see what are the common problem points, what comes up a lot that distracts you, and then you can take steps to prevent these things. So maybe if it's your phone, you forget to put it in do not disturb mode. Well, you can do that now. If it's a certain website that you really want to visit because it's just so distracting and draws you in, then you can use an extension like Stay Focused on Chrome to block it during your study sessions. Very useful stuff. Tip number 6 is when learning new concepts, use both focused and diffused thinking. Now, this is a concept that I learned about in a book called Thinking in Numbers. And look at this guy, Magnus Carlsen. He is currently the #1 chess player in the world, but back in 2004, when he was just 13 years old, he played Garry Kasparov, who was considered the best chess player in the world a couple of decades ago, and who is often considered to be the best chess player of all time. He played Gary to a draw. And look at what he does from these screenshots here. During the match, he actually gets up and walks around, looks at other tables. And what he's doing, what the author of this book has pointed out, is he's using diffuse thinking. So focused thinking really takes advantage of your prefrontal cortex to focus on one specific set of data, one specific problem, and it really concentrates on that one thing. But it sort of doesn't let the rest of your brain become activated, and a lot of ideas come from different nodes of your brain connecting different completely unrelated ideas in new different ways, and that's the diffuse mode of thinking. So when you're learning something new, you want to use diffuse thinking so you can sort of grok it. You can sort of tie it to other nodes in your brain and understand it. If you only try to focus on the problem and do nothing else, you're going to have a lot harder time solving the problem. Now, focused thinking is very, very good for problems you already understand, for processes that you've gone through before. And that's why you want to use these two modes of thinking in combination. Now, tip number 7, and I've talked about this before in terms of textbooks, is to gauge your classes. And the specific area I want you to think about here is gauge the speed at which your professor moves and at which you're able to understand. So if your professor tends to go too fast and you can't really understand everything he's presenting, maybe he writes too fast and you can't take notes fast enough, or he just moves through the material too fast for you to really understand it and give it time to process in your brain, then you want to take some steps to mitigate that problem. And one thing you could do is read through the chapter before a lecture. Maybe if you have some material that outlines what's going to be in the lecture, you can sort of use that to look at the most relevant parts of the textbook and sort of prime your brain for the lecture. One other thing you can do if the class pace is just too fast, and I can't really emphasize this enough, is to simply ask your professor for help or ask questions in the middle of class. The professors are there to help you, and you should take advantage of that. And my 8th and final tip is to start your problem sets alone. So when I was a sophomore, I had a statistics class, and I actually had a partner, and she would come over to my dorm basically every time we had a homework assignment to do, and we would do it together. And I now realize that this isn't really the best strategy. Now, I got a pretty good grade in the class anyway, but going forward, I wouldn't do this again. And here's the reason why. When you do a problem set with a partner, you're kind of robbing yourself the opportunity to really pinpoint gaps in your understanding, because two people going at the same problem at the same time, if one person is able to do the entire thing, then the other person can sort of kind of get where the first person's coming from. So if you don't really understand a problem, or maybe there's one tiny little section that you wouldn't have gotten, but your partner does, you're going to latch onto their answer. You're going to say, yeah, I sort of get that, and you're going to move on. But if you do it alone, then you're going to be able to pinpoint those areas of confusion and shore them up before you get into a group and finish the assignment. So start them alone. So those are my 8 advanced study tips. And I know this video is a bit longer than normal, but if you've got any questions about these and want to learn more about any specific ones, then be sure to leave a comment below and let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching my video on advanced study tips. Now, if you want to get more study tips every single week and other tips on being an awesome college student, then hit that big red subscribe button right there and you'll get those videos every single Thursday. Also, if you want to find the companion blog post where I link to any resources for research I did or other things I mentioned in the video, you can click the orange button right there to find that. If you missed my last video, there's a clip of it playing right there. And also, if you want to get better grades, I wrote a 100+ page book called 10 Steps to Earning Awesome Grades While Studying Less, and I want to give it to you for free. So if you want to get that book, just click the picture of the book right there. Lastly, if you want to connect with me or ask questions or submit new ideas for new videos, you can either follow me on Twitter at TomFrankly or simply leave a comment in the video below here, and I will respond to you no matter what. A writer for the Paris Review once asked the great science fiction writer Ray Bradbury where he did his writing. His response? I can work anywhere. I wrote in bedrooms and living rooms when I was growing up with my parents and my brother in a small house in Los Angeles. I worked on my typewriter in the living room with the radio and my mother and my dad and my brother all talking at the same time. Later on, when I needed an office and wanted to write my novel Fahrenheit 451 25 years ago, I went up to UCLA and I found a basement typing room where, for 10 cents, which you inserted into the typewriter, you could buy yourself 30 minutes of typing time. Now, this seems a bit surprising at first, especially given all the other famous writers who had very, let's say, particular writing habits. For instance, the author Gertrude Stein chose her writing spots based on whether or not she'd be able to see a cow walk by. But Bradbury's ability to work anywhere makes more sense when you hear his answer to the interviewer's follow-up question about whether or not he enjoyed writing. Yes, it's obvious that I do. It's the exquisite joy and madness of my life, and I don't understand writers who have to work at it. If I had to work at it, I would give up because I don't like working. I like to play. This is the kicker. Bradbury's intense love of writing is what enabled him to drown out all other distractions. He wrote because there was nothing else he'd rather be doing at the moment. And you can probably think back to things that have consumed your attention in a similar way. For me, at different points in my life, those things have been UI design, programming, and most recently, playing the guitar. When I'm playing the guitar, nothing is going to distract me because that's exactly what I want to be doing, and I get into it. But there are always less interesting things that we just have to do, like calculus assignments and ironic essays about the virtues of nihilism. And crucially, as your interest in the work you're doing diminishes, the more important the optimization of your environment becomes. So today I want to explore what goes into creating the perfect study space, one where you can easily slip into the flow state, resist distractions, and actually get your work done fast enough to have some time left over to play Cave Story before you gotta go to bed. And when it comes to creating a great study space, the first thing we need to talk about is context. You have a ton of choice when it comes to study spots. You've got libraries, you've got coffee shops, you've got basements of academic buildings that nobody else knows about, and then there is your dorm room or your bedroom. But wherever you decide to study, you want to make sure that the place you select is exclusively for studying and nothing else. That's because context is everything. Environmental factors influence a lot of our behavior, so if you put yourself in a place where the purpose is ambiguous, you're going to be a lot more likely to slip into the path of least resistance, which is usually taking quizzes to find out what your Hogwarts house is. Now, this is definitely easier to do if you select the library or that academic basement, as you probably aren't going to go there for any other reason. But if you happen to pick your dorm, it's much more important to consider. So for an example, check out how my friend Martin set up his study space. He did decide to study and work in his room, but he divided that room up with a shoji screen so that way he had one isolated area that was only for work. Now, you definitely don't have to go all out and buy a shoji screen like he did. In fact, he didn't even buy it, it was just laying around, but you can use his example to tailor your own study space. One alternative method would be to turn your desk into a corner of the room and make sure that all your fiction books and your video games and any other distracting materials are just out of your field of view. That'll make sure that what you're looking at is exclusively about the work you're supposed to be doing. Secondly, think about the quality of your lighting, because it really can affect your productivity. Now, if you can get natural light, that is definitely going to be your best option. But if you have only artificial light to work with, you can work to control that because it does make a difference. While I was doing the research for this video, I was especially interested in a German study that looked at the effects of color temperature and light intensity on the productivity of students at the Cologne University of Applied Sciences. Now, this study only tracked 50 students, so this area of science could definitely use more fleshing out. But what they did find is that students were more creative under warm light at about 3000 Kelvin, and they were able to concentrate better under colder light at about 6000 Kelvin. To add to those findings, another study done at Cornell University found that light that was too dim or too bright also negatively affected productivity. So with those findings in mind, it might be a good idea to experiment with the lighting in your study area. Maybe get a lamp for your desk and experiment with different color temperature in the bulbs that you choose for that lamp. And on the brightness end of things, you definitely don't have to go out and buy multiple bulbs at different levels of brightness to figure out what works for you. Instead, for about 10 bucks, you can go to your local hardware store and get a lamp side dimmer, and if you get a dimmable bulb, you can experiment just by toggling the switch and seeing what works. Now, in addition to the color temperature of your light, the actual temperature in the room matters a lot as well. Not only can an environment that's too hot or too cold consciously distract you and make you look up and daydream and not want to do your work, but it can also unconsciously cause you to make mistakes while you're actually working. That same Cornell study that I referenced a couple of minutes ago also looked at temperature, and they found, among other things, when temperatures were low, 68 degrees or 20 degrees Celsius, employees made 44% more mistakes than at optimal room temperature, 77 degrees or 25 degrees Celsius. So if you have access to the thermostat in your study area, make sure you're setting it to an optimal temperature for studying. And if you don't, maybe try a different location. Regardless of where you decide to study, you want to make sure that you have access to all the things you need for the particular task that you're doing. That includes notebooks, textbooks, index cards if you're going to make flashcards for studying, and pens and pencils. And on the note of pens and pencils, make sure that what you're writing with is something that you actually enjoy writing with. Now, some people definitely go way further than I would go with this. In fact, there's an entire podcast out there with literally hundreds of episodes called The Pen Addict that's all about pens. But I would say don't go for the cheapest pens that are a pain to write with, because they're just going to distract you and make the process of writing notes down unenjoyable. Additionally, make sure that you have a somewhat comfortable chair to sit in, or maybe even experiment with a standing desk. Now, I've got a standing desk in my room right now that cost, well, It cost a lot of money, but back when I was in college, I actually tried to build a much cheaper standing desk using tables from Walmart and screws and a little bit of ingenuity. But I'm gonna be honest, it wasn't enough ingenuity because that standing desk kinda sucked. But luckily, there are now standing desks for about $25, like the Spark standing desk, that are made of cardboard and that you can set up very, very easily. So that might be something to try out. Also, one additional thing that you might not have thought of having with you while you study is a notebook or a piece of scratch paper, or maybe an app where you write down things that come to mind or distract you. One of the things that can completely wreck my concentration and absolutely kill a study session for me is if something comes to mind that I just can't get out of my head. And it could be something stupid like needing to do the laundry. But if I take the time to write that down in a system that I trust, where I know I can come back and see it later, that allows me to get back into my work and let that thing go. Additionally, that piece of paper can also be a record of the things that distract you. Maybe your environment is really prone to having people come in and ask you to do things, or maybe it's just really noisy. If you write those things down, you can start to consciously make improvements and maybe just select a different spot altogether. Now, in addition to the things that you need to have available to you, you should also consider the things that you shouldn't have available to you. This is why your room is often not a good study area and why you have to work hard to make it so. Because remember, it's context. Your room has your video games, your room has your bed, your room has your 9-foot tall stack of cup ramen. It's not always the best place to study. And speaking of things that you don't need while you're studying, the big elephant in the room is the thing that you're using to watch me right now, which is the internet. Now, I know you're gonna say, I need the internet for research. I need the internet to get on my math lab. And yes, sometimes you do. But remember, tasks can almost always be broken down into individual subtasks or mini tasks. This video that you're watching right now is a good example of this, because to make this video, I had to write a script, which is basically like an essay. And writing a script isn't a singular task. It's a sequence of subtasks. There's the research phase, there's idea generation, there's the rough draft writing phase, and finally the editing phase. And guess what? I only needed the internet for one of those phases, the research phase. So during the other 3 phases, especially that rough draft writing phase where I'm very prone to distractions and I don't really want to be writing for a lot of it, I will often turn the internet off. Or I'll use an app like Cold Turkey Writer, which will literally block my ability to do anything else but write. Now, the internet and its many, many cat pictures is probably the greatest threat to your concentration, but there are many other things that can derail you as well. So before you settle into your study spot and start on your first task, make a mental note of all the potential things that could derail you in the future. If you're gonna get hungry or thirsty during the study session, make sure you bring a snack or a water bottle with you. Or if you need your laptop for your task and it has a really bad battery, make sure you've packed your charging cord. I've had several times in my life where I go to a coffee shop, I have every intention of working hard for several hours, and then, of course, I forgot the charger, so I derail. Also, when you finish studying for the day, make sure to clear your space to neutral. Bring it back to its clean, pristine state, because the next time you come to it, you don't want to have to clean it up because it's likely to make you procrastinate. You want to be able to just smoothly roll into the work immediately. And lastly, this is a bit of a weird one, but try to view your study space as a work in progress. I know we kind of talked about making the perfect quote unquote study space here, but if you're always seeking out perfection, you're never actually going to use your study space to get work done. So just view it as a work in progress that is constantly improving, but that will never be perfect. And that's okay. And one idea that might help curb that perfectionism and make you more productive is to switch locations in between tasks. This is something that I really enjoy doing myself, and I am not alone. The author Cal Newport does it as well, and he calls it the concentration circuit. Here's what he has to say about it. Something about arriving at a new and novel location, somewhere different than where you normally work, provides a boost to your motivation and aids concentration. Over time, this effect will wane. But if you keep switching locations, you can keep re-stimulating this reaction again and again, maintaining an average level of concentration that's potentially much higher than if you had slogged through the deep task in one literal sitting. All right, so because we covered a lot of ground in this video, I want to do a quick recap just like we did last week. First, make sure that your study spot is exclusively for studying. Context is king. Second, keep your lighting in mind and opt for natural lighting if you can. Try studying near a window. And if you can't, at least experiment with your light's color temperature and intensity until you find something that works for you. Third, if you have control over it, try adjusting the temperature of your study space as well. Ideally somewhere around 77 degrees Fahrenheit, but it might vary for you. Fourth, before you start studying, make sure you have access to all the materials that you're gonna need and make sure that access is easy and quick. But number 5, also make sure you don't have access to things that you don't need because they are likely to destroy your concentration and make you procrastinate. Number 6, make plans in advance to deal with possible derailments to your productivity. And number 7, try switching up locations in between tasks. Now, taken by themselves, these tips should hopefully help you make some meaningful improvements to the place where you work. But it is also sometimes helpful to be able to see how other people work and to get inspiration from them. So to that end, I've set up a fun little website called Study Spaces where you can see other people's study spaces and even submit your own. Now, the idea for this site popped into my head while I was writing the script for this video. And once I realized I could use the .es extension to get that cool looking domain name, I was able to get it registered in just about 30 seconds over at Hover, which is exactly where you should register your domain names as well. Hover makes it incredibly easy to find and secure basically any domain name that's out there and available for the taking, with extensions including the classics like .com and .net, and cooler ones like .es like I've used here and .me. When you want to actually build a website for that domain name, Hover's Connect feature will easily let you hook it up to tons of different web services, including Squarespace and Shopify. And if you want to create a professional looking email address attached to that domain, then you can do that easily with Hover as well. So if you have an idea for a fun side project that needs a domain name like I did, or if you haven't yet secured a professional domain name for yourself in your job search, give Hover a try. And if you're among the first 100 people to grab your domain with the link below, you're gonna get 10% off of your first order. I wanna give a big thanks to Hover for sponsoring this video, and guys, as always, thank you so much for watching as well. I really hope you found this video useful. If you did, you can give this video a like to help support this channel, and if you haven't already, maybe consider sharing it with a friend as well. You can also subscribe right there if you wanna get notified when new videos come out, and you can also click right there if you wanna get a free copy of my book on how to earn better grades. Alternatively, you might wanna check out our latest podcast episode right there, or if you wanna watch another video on this channel, click right there, or slam your face into your phone, that works as well. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Studying is boring, right? Every time you have to open up a textbook or tackle a homework assignment, a million things go through your mind that would be more fun to do, like skydiving or watching paint dry, or typing a YouTube comment about how the fact that I'm holding a fidget spinner right now makes you want to puke. Yeah, I can see you warming up your fingers, Derek. Of course, studying is something that you just sometimes have to do, which leads to the obvious question, if you have to do it, is there at least a way to make it more fun, or at least less boring? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. I'm gonna get this out here right up front. There is no way to make studying always fun. After all, part of the learning process is to have to sometimes go through challenging and difficult material, and that's not always going to be a walk in the park. But there are things you can do to make studying more fun more of the time, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. So let's dive right in. First and foremost, if you want to make studying fun, you need to get interested in your topic. All the way back in 1913, Francis Lockwood wrote in his book, The Freshman in His College, "In the long run, the secret of study resides in our ability to bathe our thought, our task, our lesson in the stream of interest." But how exactly do you gain that interest? Well, you certainly don't do it by jumping straight into the minute details. To gain an interest that's truly strong enough to power you through the hours of rigorous study, you need to expose yourself to the truly exciting facets of the topic first. Nobody reads the history of Middle-earth before reading The Lord of the Rings, or at least watching the movies first. And nobody goes digging through C# documentation unless they're interested in building something in C#, like a video game. That's why Bill Nye made Bill Nye the Science Guy, why Carl Sagan made Cosmos, and why David Attenborough helped to make Planet Earth. These three men are known first and foremost as science popularizers because they knew what it took to get the public interested in science. They knew that showing electricity in action or showing a shark hunting its prey is far better at generating that needed initial spark of interest than talking immediately about Ohm's law or talking about how the dorsal fin affects fluid dynamics. And the best teachers in the world understand this innately. They know that they need to get their students initially excited about the topic before they jump right into the rigorous, minute details. But if your teacher's not good at that, you can do that yourself. One great way to do this is to find a book or a movie or a podcast or even a video game that can give you an initial high-level introduction to the topic in an entertaining way, or that's somehow connected to it. I'll use my girlfriend Anna as an example. Anna is somebody who really doesn't like to read a whole lot of nonfiction. But last year we took a trip to St. Louis to go to City Museum, and on the way we listened to a podcast called Hardcore History. And if you haven't listened to this podcast before, it is one of the downright most entertaining podcasts in the world. It is my personal favorite podcast, and the particular episode we were listening to was talking about ancient Persia. After we listened to that episode, Anna actually got interested in the topic and she went and bought the book Persian Fire by the historian Tom Holland. And this is a good book, but as you can see right here, it's a pretty thick history book, and it's not Anna's usual fare. But despite that, she finished the entire book because the podcast gave her that initial spark of interest. And I remember while she was reading it, she'd come up to me several times and say, "Hey, I remember when he talked about that in the podcast." So she was building an interest link. A second tip that'll help you become more interested in anything you're studying is to adopt a growth mindset. Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, contrasts people with fixed mindsets, people who essentially believe that talent or intelligence is fixed and doesn't change, with people who have growth mindsets, people that believe anything can be changed and improved upon. Early on in the book, Dweck demonstrates how the mindset that you have also plays a huge role in how interested you'll be in your studies, especially when the going gets difficult. During her research for the book, she followed pre-med students who were taking an initial chemistry course during their freshman year of college. And in this course, the average exam grade was a C+. It was one of those weed out courses that's basically designed to be difficult so it weeds out people who are not a good fit for the medicine program right at the start. In the book, she reported that most students started out pretty interested in chemistry. Yet, over the semester, something happened. Students with the fixed mindset stayed only interested when they did well right away. Those who found it difficult showed a big drop in their interest and enjoyment. If it wasn't a testimony to their intelligence, they couldn't enjoy it. In contrast, students with the growth mindset continued to show the same high level of interest even when they found the work very challenging. Challenge and interest went hand in hand. So try to reframe the way you think about your classes, not as tests or evaluations to show everyone how intelligent or unintelligent you are, but as continual learning opportunities. Opportunities to learn, grow, and yes, sometimes fail, but to come back and improve upon those failures and to win eventually. This is a global mindset. If you can do this, you're going to find that your studies across any subject you tackle are going to be more enjoyable and more interesting. Another great way to make studying more fun and interesting is to do it with a partner. But studying with a partner is a double-edged sword that can go wrong really easily. And I find that there are two main pitfalls that you fall into when you do this. First and foremost, if you study with the wrong partner, they're going to distract you and you're never going to get any work done. And I've definitely been here. During my freshman year, I tried to study with the people in my dorm, and all we ended up doing was opening up Duke Nukem soundboards and wasting all of our time. But just as easily, you can find a partner who goes through the work so quickly and does so much of it that you end up glossing over the problems and the concepts and never end up really learning them yourself. So if you're going to do this, you need to not only find a partner who is focused and stays on task the whole time, but who also ensures that you understand the problem solution and that they understand it as well before both of you move on. The next tip is to change your environment in non-distracting ways that make studying more enjoyable. And there are a lot of ways you can do this. One of the best ways is to find a study playlist that you enjoy listening to that doesn't distract you. And I've been making a playlist here on YouTube called the Ultimate Study Music Playlist for a few years that works really well when I need to get some work done. It can also help to find a study spot that you really enjoy being in, like your favorite spot in the library or a good coffee shop, or maybe study with a cat. And having a good drink next to you while you study definitely helps as well. Pretty much every single morning, I make a pot of cinnamon clove tea, which is basically my favorite kind of tea, and I drink that while I do some writing. And it might sound weird to you, but the ritual of having that pot of tea and being able to pour multiple glasses while I write makes the process of writing more enjoyable. So I do it. And that brings us to our final tip on the list. If you want to make studying more fun and more enjoyable, then create many rewards that you'll get for doing that studying. See, your motivation to complete a task is defined partly by the reward you're going to get for doing it. And with studying, there's a pretty obvious main reward. You'll get a good grade, you'll graduate from college, and you won't have to live in a van down by the river. But that doesn't have to be the only reward you give yourself. You can also create mini rewards that can be an incentive for finishing assignment or even just putting an amount of time in. Now, you've probably all seen the gummy bear trick on Facebook, and that might work for some people. I think I would just eat all the gummy bears and close my book right away. But for the most part, these rewards should be high density fun. Letting yourself go out with friends or letting yourself play Overwatch for a while, something that isn't stupid like scrolling through Facebook for 5 minutes. It's also important to plan out the details of these mini rewards in advance. As the author Piers Still talks about in his book, The Procrastination Equation, rewards are a lot more motivating when they're pre-planned because they build anticipation. You know in the back of your mind that once you finish studying, you're going to get to do something fun, and that's going to further increase your motivation to power through that study session. This video is made possible in part by Skillshare. Now, earlier I talked about how important it is to get interested in the things you're studying, and that's especially important for required classes you have to take. But there are also things that you probably always wanted to learn, things you already have an interest in, like maybe playing the guitar like I am, or learning digital illustration, or maybe just learning how to cook so you don't have to keep living off of Hot Pockets every day. If that's the case, then you should definitely give Skillshare a try. With over 16,000 courses and a ton of different topics, there's something for almost everybody, and almost all their courses include challenges and projects that you can tackle to start putting what you're learning into action right away. A premium membership on Skillshare will run you about $10 a month, which basically makes it a Netflix subscription that'll actually make you smarter, but the first 500 people that click the link in the description below and sign up will get a free 2-month trial of unlimited learning. And trust me, in 2 months, you can learn a lot. So if you're interested, definitely go give that link a try. I want to give a big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and supporting this channel, and thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, give it a like, and if you have additional tips that I didn't mention here, definitely go down in the comments and share them so other students can benefit. You can also hit that subscribe button right there to get new videos every single week, and if you want a free copy of my book on how to earn better grades, click right there. Additionally, you should definitely go check out this week's podcast episode where we discuss a book called Essentialism, which is one of the best books I've read this year, so click right there if you want to check it out, or click right there for another video on this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. We have talked a lot on this channel about how to do well academically, how to study effectively, how to ace your tests, and how to crush those homework assignments even when you have barely any time to do them. But of course, successful students don't just do well academically, they do well all around. So that begs the question, what separates truly successful students who have it all together in all areas of their lives from everyone else? Well, that's what I want to talk about in this video, and today we're going to cover 8 habits of successful students. And yes, this is definitely a riff off of Stephen Covey's excellent book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I have read and loved, but these 8 habits are unique. These come from my own observations of people that I know who are successful and things I've tried to cultivate in my own life, and I think every single one of them is going to help you in the upcoming semester. So let's dive right in. To start things off, successful students are forward thinkers. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in The Hobbit that it does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him. And as a student, you have a lot of live dragons to contend with, not just on the academic side of things, but on all fronts. You've got your career plans, you've got relationships, you have your living situation, errands you need to run. There is a lot to keep track of. And when I was in college, I had a lot of friends who always seemed to be scrambling to get these things done at the last second. They were basically letting life sneak up on them. But if you can build a forward-thinking mindset, this isn't going to happen to you. And you'll also position yourself for opportunities that would pass others by. So if you're not already a natural forward thinker, if you're not automatically thinking of things that are coming up in the near future, how do you become one? Well, I definitely think it is possible because I didn't used to be one, but now I am. When I was a kid, I remember my mom would just look up from whatever she was doing oftentimes and ask me, "Hey Thomas, have you brushed your teeth today?" And I remember thinking how do you think of stuff like that? I wasn't talking about brushing my teeth, you weren't brushing your teeth, it just popped into your mind. And eventually I realized it was because she cared about the health of her sons and she was simply being mindful about it. And I worked to become that kind of a person myself. So if you're like I was back then, you don't already have this mental machinery put into place, the first step is to build some structures into your everyday routines that remind you to think in a forward-thinking manner. One good way to start doing this is to create a reminder in your task management system or your calendar to sit down once a week and think, what do I have coming up in the near future? Do I need to sign up for classes? Well, then I should make a reminder for the exact time that the class scheduler opens so I can get in there and get my classes before everyone else takes the good ones. Or do I need to get an apartment soon? If you live in a college town like I did, then it's likely that every apartment complex is going to have their leases start around the exact same time. And because of that, everyone's going to be signing leases all in one big drove. So do yours early, otherwise come next semester, you're going to be living in a van down by the river. And while you're going through this mental exercise, also think about your relationships. Maybe you have somebody who has a birthday coming up soon, or you have a friend that you haven't talked to in a while. I find that when you actually think about these things, and when you apply a forward-thinking mindset to your relationships, you tend to maintain them better. And this is important because as people get older, they start to get busier and they start to have less time for their friends. And it's only people who are deliberate about maintaining their relationships that actually keep them. The second habit is that successful students deliberately move towards adulthood. They don't let adulthood sneak up on them. And by that, I'm not talking about becoming a person who hates fun and tells kids to get off their lawn, but every human is going to have skills they need to build and challenges they need to face at some point in their lives. And a lot of people try to push those things off as much as they possibly can. But if you can become the kind of person who is willing to take on those things early, I'm talking about things like having your own bank account, doing your own taxes, or filling out your own financial aid forms, or learning how to iron a shirt or do your own laundry, then once you have to do those things, you've already got that base of skills to apply to them. Habit number 3, successful students strive to become what I like to call solution finders. They're the kind of people that when faced with a tough problem that doesn't have an immediately apparent solution, they are willing to push through and figure out how to solve it. And sadly, a lot of students aren't like this. A friend of mine named Matt is a web developer at a pretty big company, and this company values this solution finding mindset so much that they have a rule for people who get stuck on problems. They call it the 15-minute rule. Essentially, if an employee gets stuck on a problem, they have to spend 15 more minutes working on that problem before they're allowed to ask for help. And during that time, they have to document everything they do and write down what didn't work, so that way when they do ask for help, they're able to give context to the person who's helping them. Additionally, once they hit that 15-minute mark, they must ask for help. And this rule creates a nice balance. It makes them be independent and solve problems on their own, but also ensures that they're not being so stubborn that they never ask for help. And that ensures that they're not wasting the company's time. And adopting this rule will actually prove very useful to you as a student, because if you're willing to solve problems independently, you're going to solve a lot of them that you would have originally asked for help on. And if you do have to ask for help, you're going to show your teacher that you take the problems seriously and that you're not just crying out for help the moment things get tough. Habit number 4 is to start actively building relationships with your teachers, with your professors, and with other faculty members at your school or university. When you do this, you start to build a network of people who aren't just in your immediate age group or at your same level of progression. And it also has a couple of other very good benefits. Number 1, these people are going to be able to tell you about opportunities that you would have otherwise missed. And if you ever happen to need a letter of recommendation for a job application or a scholarship, those are going to be the people who you can go to, because now they know you and they trust you and they're going to be willing to do it. And you probably shouldn't ask for a recommendation from your roommate Jimmy. So how do you start building this network? Well, a great first step comes at the beginning of a new semester. Go up to the teacher at the end of each class, introduce yourself briefly, shake their hand, and just tell them you're excited to be there. That makes a really great first impression. Additionally, in your free time, if you happen to come across like an article that you think one of your professors would be interested in, email them that article. Just say, hey, I read this and I thought of you. I remember back in 2011, I was taking my first marketing class in college, and this was right around the time that Valve was getting ready to release Portal 2. And they did something really weird with the marketing for Portal 2. They had this weird convoluted game setup where people could buy games on Steam and play lots and lots of hours in those games, and that would all contribute to making Portal 2 release a couple of days early. So essentially they found a way to let all these other games that weren't selling all that well ride the coattails of this big anticipated game, and I thought that was a brilliant marketing strategy. So I found an article about it, I sent it to my marketing professor and said, hey, I think you'd be interested in this, and the next week he actually talked about it in class. So doing that definitely helped to build that relationship. The 5th habit is that successful students are always trying to learn outside of class. They're trying to learn from a variety of different sources, and they are branching out into different areas that aren't on their narrow major path. And I think this is really important to do, because once you start getting interested in a variety of different subjects and you start dabbling in different areas, you start to build this diverse web of connections in your brain that allows you to be more creative in your main work. Plus, when you take just a little bit of time to branch out from your major path, you might stumble onto something that actually proves to be a huge boon to your future career prospects. One great example is my best friend Martin. He's always been really interested in language learning, but he majored in MIS in college. But that didn't stop him from creating a blog all about how to learn new languages, and that actually got him some recognition in the language learning community. He was actually on a list of language learning experts pretty recently. Not to mention, the experience he got building that website actually led directly to him getting hired at a web development agency in our city right after graduating, who usually didn't like to hire recent graduates because he had a lot of experience that most people didn't have. Habit number 6 is to constantly be keeping your ear to the ground for opportunities. Here's the thing, when you're in school, or especially when you're in college and university, there are a ton of opportunities around you, but you have to be willing to look for them and know where to look. One great thing to do is to be keeping your eye out for bulletin boards around your campus or in your school, because a lot of opportunities are going to be posted as flyers on those bulletin boards. Additionally, follow your school's social media accounts. And I'm not just talking about the main social media account, follow your professors and your teachers, follow departments that you're a part of, because a lot of these departments and professors, they're going to post opportunities that they think their students would be good fits for. And this habit is actually directly related to how I got my first internship, because I was following my school's career center on Twitter, and they posted a tweet about a big company in our area that was putting on this freshman leadership seminar. So I saw the tweet, I signed up, I got accepted, and at that event, I met a mentor who was instrumental in getting me hired at that internship. The 7th habit is that successful students put a lot of effort into keeping themselves both physically and mentally fit. When you're a student who's ambitious, there's often this general mindset that you should be spending all of your time studying or pursuing opportunities. And when a lot of students do this, they often let their nutrition habits, their exercise habits, and their sleep go by the wayside.
And what's worse, they'll often work themselves to the point where they mentally burn out, or they become depressed or have a lot of anxiety. And the sad thing is, when they're letting their physical and mental health go by the wayside, they aren't able to perform in the things that they really want to do in the first place. And truly successful students know this, which is why they make time for exercise. They make time for making good, healthy meals or getting them at the dining center. And they also get enough sleep every single night. And one little side note that I'll make here, successful students are willing to ask for help if they need it. If they're dealing with mental burnout or anxiety or depression, they will go ask a professional if they can't deal with those issues themselves. And that brings us to the final habit on the list. Successful students try things before they think they're ready. I want to underline this idea with something that Neil Pasricha talks about in his book, The Happiness Equation. In the book, he talks about how people generally approach new skills or challenges and how they do it in a linear way. They feel like they have to be able to do it first, and then they'll want to do it, and finally, they'll do it. But when you think this way, you never actually get to do the thing because you never gain the skills to do it in the first place. So Neil encourages you to take that linear model and make it circular. Do, which leads to can do because you're gaining skills through doing. That leads to want to do, and the circle repeats and enforces itself. Plus, you're often much more qualified than you think you are. A lot of students and a lot of people in general deal with imposter syndrome. They think, who am I to do this? I don't have a certification, I don't have a qualification, but in many cases, you don't need it. I'll give you an example. When I was a freshman in college, I really wanted to join a club on campus called Business Council. These were basically like the leaders of the business school at the university, but they had a rule. They only let people in who are sophomores and above. Very rarely would they make an exception for a freshman. So what did I think? I didn't think I'm just gonna wait. I'm just gonna, wait till I'm a sophomore. I thought I'm going to apply because what's the worst that's gonna happen? They're gonna reject me and I'll try again next semester. So I applied, I put my best foot forward, and I got accepted. And what's more, during my first semester as a member, I also got elected to the leadership board. So if something seems exciting to you, but it also seems a little scary, try it anyway, because that is what successful students do. That brings us to the end of my list, but if you have additional ideas or habits you think I left off of it, I would love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. So definitely let me know what you're thinking. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, definitely give it a like to support this channel. If you're not subscribed yet, you can subscribe right there to get new videos every single week. And you can also get a free copy of my book on how to earn better grades right there. You can check out our latest podcast episode right there, where we go over 10 of our favorite fiction books. Or if you'd like another video on this channel, click right there or smash your face into it or whatever. It'll probably work, especially if you're using a phone. And I will see you guys.
There's this
next
pretty
week.
well-known quote that gets thrown around a lot, and it's often attributed to Albert Einstein. And it goes, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. Now, whether or not Einstein was the person who actually said this, let's be real, he probably wasn't, it's still really insightful, and reversing it reveals a pretty powerful piece of study advice. If you want to understand something well, explain it. Now, this idea is something I touched on briefly back in my video summary of the Study Less, Study Smart lecture by Dr. Marty Lobdell, because in that lecture, he talked about one of the most effective study techniques being to teach what you're learning to someone else. So in this video, I want to dig deeper into that idea and share with you a step-by-step process for doing this, which has been called the Feynman technique. Now, this technique is named after the physicist Richard Feynman, who was, in his own right, a great scientist. In fact, back in 1965, he won a Nobel Prize for his work in quantum electrodynamics, which is something I had to practice saying a couple of different times, and he contributed to science in a number of different ways, including the development of what are called Feynman diagrams, which are basically graphical representations of the math behind how subatomic particles work. But in addition to being a great scientist, he was also a great teacher and a great explainer, and in fact, one of his nicknames was the Great Explainer, because he was able to boil down incredibly complex concepts and put them in simple language that other people could understand. And that's why he's one of those great scientists who is also known as a very good teacher. And in fact, even in his own learning, Feynman was famous for tirelessly working through equations until the concept he was wrangling with was intuitively easy to understand in his mind. So that's why this technique is named after him, but you don't have to be a physicist or you don't have to be working on math or science problems to use this technique, because explaining a concept works to improve your understanding of that concept in basically any area, be it history or be it math or be it web development, doesn't matter. And it also works for multiple different purposes. If you're shaky on a concept and you want to quickly improve your understanding, you can use it. But if you already have a pretty confident grasp of a subject and say you've got a test coming up soon, you can also use it to test your understanding and challenge your assumptions. As Feynman himself said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
The ultimate way to ensure that you actually understand all the little nitty-gritty details of a concept in your head is to explain it to someone else, or to at least pretend you're doing so. And that is the crux of the Feynman technique. So let's get into it. It's a process of 4 steps, and the first step is to simply get out a piece of paper and write the name of the technique down at the top. And in the example I filmed here, we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem because it is simple and it won't get in the way of the actual steps we're going to go through. Step 2 is to explain the concept and to do it in simple, plain English, or French, or really whatever language you happen to speak. But the idea here is to do it in a way that's easy to understand, as if you were teaching someone else. And don't just settle with defining the concept either. Also work through examples and make sure that you're able to use the concept in practice as well. For step 3, identify any of the areas that you're shaky on after your explanation, or identify areas that you got stuck on which halted your explanation, and go back to the source material or go back to your notes or work through examples until your understanding of these sub areas is just as solid as all the other areas. And finally, step 4 is to look at your explanation and try to identify any areas where you've resorted to using technical terms or convoluted language, and then challenge yourself to break down those terms and explain them in simplified, easy to understand words. Remember, the key here is simplicity. The act of explaining a topic as if you were teaching it to somebody who didn't have the same base assumptions and base knowledge that you have is the ultimate test of your own knowledge in that subject. And that's pretty much it. That's all there is to the Feynman technique. Now, using this technique is incredibly helpful because it, number 1, helps you to quickly overview the concept and see where your knowledge is solid, but number 2, it helps you to instantly pinpoint the areas where you're shaky and where you need to do extra work. And that makes this technique a great first step in reviewing a concept because it's very efficient and it helps you waste less time. I did want to give you guys one extra suggestion though, and it relates to how you frame your mind going into step 4. Instead of just thinking, how can I make this simple? How can I put it in plain English? Also think, how would I explain this to a kid? Why? Well, besides asking questions like, can I have another Oreo or can I go watch Dragon Ball Z? A kid's gonna ask, why? Why does that work? And that's gonna help to challenge your assumptions. For instance, going back to our Pythagorean theorem example, maybe you know the formula, but a kid would ask you, why does that formula work? Why does the Pythagorean theorem hold as a rule for all right triangles? And yeah, maybe you understand that intuitively. Maybe you can bust out the proof by rearrangement, but maybe you can't. Maybe you've always just looked at the formula and taken it at face value, in which case you have some more learning to do. Now, speaking of the Pythagorean theorem, maybe that was a bit too simple of an example for you and you'd like to see this technique applied to something more complex or something that has nothing to do with math at all. If that's you, in the companion article for this video, I've included a couple of different examples, one going through Bayes' rule, which is a concept in probability theory and statistics, and one going over the CSS box model, which is related to web development and not related to math at all, that you can check out. So if you want to see those, you can click the card on screen right now to get over to the article, or you can find the link down in the description below. Beyond that, if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, definitely give it a like to support this channel. And if you have additional tips or ways that you use this technique personally, I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. Additionally, if you're not subscribed to this channel yet and you want to get new tips on how to be a more productive student, you can click right there to subscribe, and you can also click right there if you want to get a free copy of my book on how to earn better grades. Otherwise, you can click right around there to find another video, which you'll probably find interesting. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Hey, what is going on, guys? So I think we can all agree that studying takes far too much time. So what I want to do in this video is show you guys how you can remember more of what you learn, even if you're spending fewer actual hours studying. And the way to do that is by spacing out that study time. This is a technique called spaced repetition, and to do it, you add progressively longer and longer time intervals in between each of your study sessions. So in this video, I want to show you exactly how you can do that, both with your paper flashcards and with apps, both for smartphones and computers. But first, I wanted to get into why this technique is so powerful, and also talk to you a little bit about the history behind it and how it relates to our memories in general. Spaced repetition leverages a memory phenomenon known as the spacing effect, which describes how our brains make better connections and overall remember things more effectively when we space out our learning over time. Here's how Pierce J. Howard, the author of my least favorite book to haul into coffee shops, puts it. Work involving higher mental functions, such as analysis and synthesis, needs to be spaced out in order to allow new neural connections to solidify. New learning drives out old learning when insufficient time intervenes. And we've actually known about this effect for quite a long time. Back in the late 1800s, a psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus basically launched the field of memory science itself by embarking upon an intense study where he made himself memorize long lists of nonsense syllables. And through that research, he eventually came to develop what's called the forgetting curve, which describes how memories decay over time. But what he also learned is that by spacing out his efforts to memorize these lists, he could put in less actual study time to get them memorized perfectly. For example, for one list of 12 syllables, he found that it took him 68 repetitions on one day and then 7 repetitions the next day to memorize it perfectly. But by spacing out his studying over the course of 3 days, he found he could achieve the same level of perfection in only 38 repetitions. Over the past 130 years since he published his findings, lots of other studies have been able to replicate the same positive results, which leads us to the question, why does the spacing effect work? Well, to put it in simple terms, it turns out that one of the most important parts of the learning process is actually forgetting. Now, what forgetting truly is a subject for another video that I'll publish in the future, but the most important thing to note here is that the more we've forgotten something, that is, the harder we have to work to retrieve it since we last learned it or studied it, the greater the increase in learning will be. To make this a bit more clear, here's how the author Benedict Carey, who wrote the book How We Learn, explains it. Some amount of breakdown must occur for us to strengthen learning when we revisit the material. Without a little forgetting, you get no benefit from further study. It is what allows learning to build, like an exercised muscle. And that's the main reason why Carey calls spaced repetition one of the most powerful methods for remembering what you learn in his book. And I would add to that the fact that you can do this with basically any other learning technique. It's entirely complementary because it's all about just modifying the time periods in which you study. You can do anything within those time periods, you're just using the time periods as intelligently as possible. With that being said, now I want to get into how you can put spaced repetition into action and implement it into your own study systems. And we're going to talk about apps and computer programs that you can use in a minute here, but first I want to talk about a system that you can use with your paper flashcards, which is called the Lightner system. And here's how it works. The first step is to decide on a number of boxes that you're going to use to hold the cards in your system. Now, I don't actually own little boxes, so I've just substituted rubber bands and sticky notes that say box, but that actually works just as well and actually makes the system more portable, so that's pretty cool. And from there, each individual box is going to represent a different study time interval. So box 1 might be studying every day, box 2 might be studied every other day, and so on. And when you're studying your cards in the boxes, every time you get a card right, it's going to graduate to the next box. So you're going to see it less and less often. But if you get a card wrong, it's going to go all the way to box number 1, no matter where it was. And by using this system, you get 2 main benefits. Number 1, you're maximizing your learning through the spacing effect, but number 2, you're also studying more efficiently because you're spending more time on the cards that need the most attention and less time on the ones you know really well, rather than studying every single card equally. Now, this paper system works really well for both of those goals, but if you want to take advantage of more advanced scheduling algorithms and other features, you're going to need to find yourself a spaced repetition app. And there are a lot of contenders in this area, but I want to focus first on what is probably the most popular one right now, and that is called Anki. Anki has a huge community, it's insanely customizable, and best of all, it has apps for almost every platform out there, and almost all of them are free, with the exception of the iPhone app, which oddly costs a whopping $25. Now, I think the price is that high because it's their way of basically letting people support the app since it's free everywhere else, but if you're on an iPhone and you don't want to pay that much, fear not, because Anki also has a companion web app called Anki Web, which is accessible from mobile Safari, so you can use that for free if you want. Now, with Anki, creating cards is really easy, and I really like the fact that you can add basically any kind of media you want to your cards, including pictures, which is awesome because adding pictures to your flashcards can really help increase retention. However, the killer feature of Anki is the ability to rate cards based on difficulty when you're studying them. So essentially, when you turn a card over, you can tell the program how hard it was for you to dredge the answer up from the depths of your memory, and it will use that data to decide how long it's going to be before you see that card again. And that's really the main strength of spaced repetition apps versus a paper system. Each individual card can be tracked, can have a difficulty rating, and can be adjusted in the algorithm so you're getting the most benefit of the spacing effect. Anki is definitely not the only spaced repetition app out there though, so if you're looking for alternatives, I've got a few things in mind for you to take a look at. Number 1 being an app called Tiny Cards, which I showed off in my previous video on how to make better flashcards. Now, Tiny Cards is only for the iPhone, unfortunately, but there should be an Android version coming soon, and honestly, when compared to Anki, I think it's a lot more simple, a lot prettier, and the process of making cards is more fun and faster because they have an excellent system for adding images to your cards. Aside from Tiny Cards, there are also apps like Flashcards Deluxe, Memrise, SuperMemo, Nemosine, Eidetic, Quizlet, and probably a bunch of others that I don't even know about right now, but I'm sure you will let me know about down in the comments. So before I wrap this video up, I have a couple more things I want to mention. Number one being that the script I wrote for this video is actually about half the length of the blog post I wrote, so if you want a lot more detail, especially pertaining to the memory bits and how the spacing effect works, you can click the blog post link in the description down below or on the card on screen right now and read to your heart's content. Also, and I have been really excited to announce this for quite a long time now, there is now an official College Info Geek t-shirt on dftba.com, and I am super stoked about this. I've already ordered mine, and there's going to be a link down in the description, also a card. So if you would like to get your very own shirt, which may or may not grant superpowers, you can click either of those links and order one. Now, one cool thing about the shirt's design is it was actually created by the College Info Geek community. My good friend Ashley did the hand letter design itself, but the mantra or the saying on the shirt was actually decided upon by people in the College Info Geek community over on Reddit, which I think is really cool. And I would love to continue to play up this community aspect. So if you get a shirt, I would love to see you tweeting awesome pictures of you wearing it. So just send them to me over on Tom Frankly, and I will probably retweet them. You can also put them in the Reddit as well if you like. And other than that, that's all I have for this video, guys. So thanks so much for watching. If you found it useful, give it a like to support this channel. And you can also subscribe with that button right down there if you want to get new videos on being a more effective student every single week. You can also get a copy of my book on earning better grades by going to the picture of the book right there and clicking your mouse button. You can find the previous video right over there, which was about how to use flashcards more effectively. And if you want to find that awesome article, which is way more detailed than this video was, go to the full article thing right there. If you'd like to connect with me, you can use the social media links down below, but there's also a non-zero probability that you can connect with me by yelling into a conch shell. So maybe give that a try too.
I want to show you something cool that I can do on my Mac here. So I get a lot of email, and for a lot of these emails, I have to type the exact same responses. But instead of typing the same words over and over and over again, I have this cool little Chrome extension called Georgias that lets me bind templates to little keywords that I can type. So if somebody emails me and say they want me to do something, and I just don't have the time to do it, instead of typing out a long apology and an explanation, I can just type the word busy, hit tab, and the entire response will pop out in less than a second. Over the past few months, I've been steadily developing more and more templates as the need arises, and according to the app's statistics, it's already saved me over 5 hours of typing, which isn't too shabby. But what if you're using paper? Well, on paper, we have shorthand writing systems. These are systems that vastly cut down on the characters or strokes needed to express ideas. The process of writing in shorthand is called stenography, and it's an art that basically every journalist had to learn before the widespread availability of these little devices. The origins of shorthand date back to the 4th century BC in ancient Greece, though even before that, scribes in ancient Egypt developed two different writing systems, the hieratic and later the demotic, which let them write much more quickly than they could using complicated hieroglyphics. Fast forward to the past couple of centuries, and two systems became dominant in the shorthand sphere, the Pitman shorthand method and the Gregg shorthand method. Both these systems are phonetic, that is, their alphabets aren't one-to-one approximations for Latin characters, rather they're symbols designed to express how words sound when they're being spoken. Masters of these two systems have been known to be able to write at 200 words per minute or more, which means they can write basically anything word for word as it's said, but the problem here is that both of these systems are incredibly difficult to learn. They take a lot of time and practice, and as a student, I'm betting you probably don't have that time to dedicate to learning one of them. For example, here is, as best as I can write it with 10 minutes of practice, the statement, "There is a ninja standing right behind you. I am not joking. You seriously need to run." Written in Gregg shorthand. Now, I'd wager it'd take you a bit of time to figure out how to read that, let alone be able to write it proficiently. So on one side of the problem, writing in Gregg or Pitman shorthand takes way too long to learn, but on the other side, writing in longhand is painful for your wrist and simply takes too long to do while you're in class. What's the solution? Well, actually, I've got two solutions in mind. The first one is to use a simpler shorthand writing system. One option is alphabetic shorthand systems like speed writing or personal shorthand. Now, these are systems that use the standard Latin alphabet you're already familiar with, and while some shorthand purists may turn their noses up at them like snooty aristocratic gentlemen, and while indeed you may not be able to write as fast as you could with Gregg or Pitman, the trade-off here is that they take far less time to learn. Another option is to use a system with characters that do differ from that standard Latin alphabet, but that are easier to learn than the phonetic alphabets of Gregg or Pitman. The most famous example I can think of is called T-line, which is actually still used by a lot of journalists today, but an even newer example that I came across recently is called Forward Improved Shorthand, which is supposedly designed to be able to be learned within 15 minutes. So here's that same statement from before, but now written in forward. And I have to say that while it took me probably 10 minutes to puzzle out how to write it in Greg, it was really easy to write it in forward, and I found myself being able to memorize the new characters after writing them just once or twice. The other solution is to create what amounts to your own shorthand system. And this is an idea I've had kicking around in my brain for a long time, and it's actually why I made this video in the first place, because if you're the only one who's going to review your notes and no one else is going to need to look at them, then why not write them in the most efficient way you can for you? With that being said, let's get into one of the experiments that I've been doing in recent weeks with my notes. So let's take 3 words: allegation, procrastination, and litigation. All these 3 words end with the suffix shun, which in my mind sounds a bit like shin. So we could just draw a picture of a shin with a foot. Now let's circle the shin, and then we could simplify that drawing down, and then simplify it once more until we have a 2-stroke symbol that resembles a shin. Now I can add that as the suffix instead of writing shun, which is 6 strokes, and this one is 2, so now we have a reduction of 4 strokes. If you want to do another example, let's take the suffix able. When I think of able, I think of somebody who is strong and able to do things, so let's take a big beefy arm, draw that, and then simplify that once again, and now we have yet another 2-stroke symbol. Now, going beyond those 2 examples that I made up, I just want to give you a list of good targets in your notes for developing potential symbols. And one target is prefixes and suffixes, and I'm actually going to link to a big list of these in the article for this video. Another idea is function words, essentially the words that make sentences coherent, like with, and, because, or, greater than, less than, those kind of things. These words don't really carry a whole lot of information about the concepts within them, so they're prime targets for shortening. So that rounds out all the ideas I had about shorthand right now, but I did want to leave you with one final tip before we round out the video, and that is that shorthand isn't the only way to condense the amount of notes you have to take and also to cut down on the amount of carpal tunnel you suffer from. In fact, you can draw diagrams, you can use arrows to connect concepts and ideas, and you can find other ways to jot down the things you're learning in class without having to write them out fully. And as always, if you've already done your own experiments or have any tips I didn't mention here, I would love to hear about them down in the comments, so let your knowledge flow forth from your brain. And if you enjoyed this video, as always, give it a like to support this channel, and I will see you in next week's video. Thanks for watching. Hey there guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Now if you want to get new tips on being a more effective student every single week, you can click that big red subscribe button right there. Also, I wrote an entire book on how to earn better grades, and if you want to get a free copy, you can click the picture of the book and I'll send you one. And if you want to read the article for this video and find all the links to things I mentioned, you can click the orange button right there. In last week's video, we talked about resources for getting cheaper prices on the textbooks you have to buy, so check it out if you missed it. And if you want to connect, I'm Tom Frankly on Instagram and Twitter, or you can leave a comment down below. Hey, what's up guys? So finals are upon us. I know some of you guys have already started finals, some of you guys have them coming very soon, and for that reason, I'm releasing this video early this week, so hopefully it can help you in creating a study schedule. And what I want to do specifically in this video is actually give you a look at one of the schedules I built for my final exams as a student. But before that, I've got some general tips and principles that you can use to build your study schedule, so hopefully you can front load all of the work and plan effectively, and that will help you study in the most efficient way possible through the weeks leading up to finals and through that actual finals week. Now, I think there are some guiding principles that you should keep in mind when you're building your study schedule. These will help you make it as effective as possible. And number one, you want to minimize the time that you spend procrastinating and maximize the time you spend studying effectively. You also want to study the most important material in the right order. And lastly, you want to manage your energy and stress levels. So with those guiding principles in mind, the first step to building your study schedule is to figure out when your finals are. And I have to mention this because I remember my school did not have final exams during the actual class periods that I went to. Instead, they had this convoluted formula algorithm thing where you had to go on the website and figure out the first time of the week when your first class met, and that would correlate to some other exam date, probably in the evening when you want to be eating dinner. And I can only assume they put a bunch of dice into a Yahtzee jar, and that's how they figured it out. Once you know those exam dates and you're sure you're not going to be showing up to an empty classroom an hour after the exam ends, which, by the way, pro tip, is the easiest way to fail an exam, then what you want to do is arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible to help you build that study schedule. I'm talking the format of your exams, multiple choice, true, false, essay style, what have you, the material that's going to cover, is it comprehensive or is it only going to cover what you had since the last exam, and how much of your grade this exam is going to count for. You also want to keep in mind any homework assignments or projects that you have have due during the exam week. And speaking of that, it's good to step back for a second and ask yourself, what kind of person am I when it comes to scheduling study sessions and project and homework sessions? Maybe you're the kind of person who likes to intersperse the project work with the study sessions to kind of give your brain a break and a change of pace. Or maybe you're like me and you do better to put all of your project and homework work on one day and then put all the study sessions on another day and keep it all compartmentalized so your brain is in the right frame of reference on each day. After that, take stock of your resources. Make sure you have the syllabi, all the course materials, handouts from your professors, notes and textbooks. And at this point, your number one priority is to assess your knowledge for each class. Try to figure out exactly what's going to be covered on each exam and figure out where the gaps in your knowledge are. One final step before we begin actually scheduling things, and that is to prioritize your classes and figure out which ones you should study for the most and in what order you want to study them. And to figure that out, you want to figure out which classes are most important. There are a few different factors that go into this. One of them is which finals count for the most points, the percentage of your grade, and those are usually listed on your syllabi. You also want to take into account your current standing in each class. If in one class you have a solid A, then maybe your final performance is not going to influence that grade too much. And maybe in another class, you're kind of on the precipice between one grade and another, and that final will really count for what your actual grade is going to be. Once you've taken those factors into account, you can compare them against the knowledge gaps you identified earlier to figure out which classes are the most important and which classes you're struggling the most in. And those two pieces of information together will help you more accurately prioritize how long you should study for each class and in what order you should schedule your sessions. All right, now we are ready to begin scheduling. So in the book, How to Study for College, which was written by the Cornell University professor Walter Pock, the same guy who made the Cornell note-taking system, he recommends creating something called a home stretch schedule for finals. And this is basically a schedule much like your normal weekly schedule, but like ultra detailed. You want to put lots of things in there like your meal times, all the little tasks you have to take care of, and this can help you figure out where the gaps are that you can schedule study sessions for your finals. One thing I'd like to add to this is you should try to group and batch your small tasks into as few sessions as possible. That way you'll have more uninterrupted blocks of time where you can actually get studying done. Now, personally, my tool of choice for this has always been Google Calendar. I've been using it ever since I was a freshman, and if you're more of a paper planner person, that's more your speed, that's totally cool. But at this point in the video, I want to go into Google Calendar and show you one of my own finals week study schedules. All right, so here we are looking at the week of April 25th to May 1st, 2010. This was the second semester of my freshman year, and this is the week leading up to finals, which I have my exams scheduled in blue to let me know when they are, and I've looked up when they're scheduled. So let's look at this week leading up to finals. And it's looking pretty crazy right now, so I'm going to turn off the homework and the other and work. So this is my class schedule. I've got, I believe, 6 classes here. 2 of them meet only once per week, so they're pretty easy. And then I've got a Java review session that I remember was like a whole class-wide thing the professor was running. Definitely wanted to be at that. And also adding in my work, I worked probably 20 hours a week or more, basically all through college. So I was balancing that with classes. And actually this semester, there were more than 20 hours a week because I had training sessions for the summer job I was training for. So I had to balance all of this. And because it was so hectic, I wanted to make sure that I was getting my meals and workouts in, so that on my other calendar, I had lunches, which were usually very quick, and then dinners, which were with friends, and I wanted to make sure those were longer because I really valued them. I also had gym times to make sure that I was staying healthy during this studying week. So, as Pock says in the book about the home stretch schedule, I now can identify gaps of time where I can start scheduling my study sessions, and that's exactly what I did. And what I want to point out here is I have finishing my homework on one day, I've got one other homework on this other day, and then when reviewing, I tried to be very specific about what I was going to review. Remember what we talked about with the Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill the time allotted for it. You shouldn't show up to the library and just tell yourself, I'm going to study for 5 hours, because you're going to end up just working on one thing for 5 straight hours. Instead, keep Parkinson's law in mind and also realize that your brain's efficiency is going to take a dive after 25 to 30 minutes. So you can try scheduling your study sessions with the Pomodoro technique in mind and try to accomplish a specific set of things within 25 or 30 minutes and then give yourself a small break. That being said, let's go over to the finals week, and you can see I have my finals labeled in blue so I know exactly when they are, and I just have work. There were no classes during that week, so I didn't schedule things here because I was not perfect as a student, but you could keep scheduling things and being efficient up until your finals are done, and then you are home free. All right, so to round this video out, I've got 3 final quick tips that can hopefully make your study schedule even better. And the first one is to pay attention to the ebbs and flows of your body's energy levels throughout the day. For instance, maybe your energy levels are highest in the morning, in which case maybe you should schedule your hardest study session for then, but also make sure you're going to bed early enough that you're well rested to get up early. Or maybe you're a night owl and you find that you're really focused at night, in which case don't worry about getting up too early. Number 2, remember that the performance of your brain is connected to the well-being of your body. So schedule time to exercise and schedule time for breaks so you can reduce stress. And lastly, ask for help when you need it. Be sure to challenge yourself and try to work through problems, but if you really get stuck, asking your professor can accelerate your review process and save you a lot of stress. If you've seen my video with tips on starting a new semester, you'll remember I had a hidden calendar with my professor's office hours on it, and I could activate it at any time to figure out when a certain professor would be in the office and when I could go get help. So that's it for this video. If you check the companion article for it, you'll find screenshots of my Google Calendar in case you want to use it as a guide for your own. Otherwise, if you like this video, give it a like to support this channel, and I will see you in next week's video. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to get new tips every week on being a more effective student, you can click that big red subscribe button right there. And also, if you want to get a free copy of my book on earning better grades, click the picture of the book and I'll send you one. If you want to see that companion blog post, click the orange button right there. And if you missed last week's video, we talked about a brain hack of sorts for performing better on your exams, so check it out if you haven't seen it. And lastly, I'm Tom Frankly on Instagram or Twitter if you want to connect, or you can leave a comment down below. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at speed reading in depth. In this video, we looked at the science of how our eyes move over text and how our brains process that text. And in this video, we looked at some common speed reading techniques and showed how they're really not as effective as a lot of people want to believe they are. So the question still remains though, are there ways you can legitimately increase your reading speeds? Well, I believe that there are, and in this video, I want to give you 5 different methods that you can use to actually read faster. The first method is deceptively simple and, well, maybe a little bit inconvenient. It's to simply read often, read widely, and read challenging material. I emailed a postdoctorate researcher at the University of San Diego named Elizabeth Schotter, who's done a lot of research on speed reading for this episode, and I asked her, what are the skills that help people learn to read faster? And she told me, for skilled readers who are still reading between that 200 and 400 words per minute range, they're people who have a lot of experience reading, who have a lot of command over their language and vocabulary, and who have a lot of prior background knowledge they can use to apply to whatever it is they're reading quickly. This indicates what you probably already know. Reading is a skill, and like any other skill that's worth the time to take to build, reading does take time and practice to get good at. Now, this next method will help you if you have the same problem with reading that I have. When I'm trying to read nonfiction, I really want to know what's in the book, but I'll often find myself getting bored, or more commonly, I'll read one sentence that will send me down a mental rabbit hole of sorts, and then I'll find myself daydreaming. So to reduce the instances of boredom and daydreaming when you're reading, I have 2 different ideas for you. And the first one is to form what I call an interest link with something you're already interested in. And that's a term I completely just made up right now, but the general idea is to try to connect the thing you're reading with something that you already have a lot of interest in. Another idea is to do a little bit of experimenting to find your optimal spot for reading. For example, this armchair is not a good spot for me to read. Whenever I read here, I find myself daydreaming all the time. And that's why I tend to do a lot of my reading outside instead. Okay, so third method, and this applies mainly to textbook readings or readings where you already know the specific type of information you want to pull out of it, or at least have a general idea, and it is to pre-read before you start actually reading. And by pre-reading, I mean going through the chapter headings, the table of contents, looking at bold and formatted text throughout the chapter, and going to the end of chapter and looking at the vocabulary terms and the review questions. By doing these things beforehand, you're essentially priming your brain to notice the most important information when you're reading, and that will let you do the next method, which, and this is going to go completely against everything you probably think I've been building towards in this series, skimming. Even though we've established that skimming is a form of reading where your comprehension is lower, it's still an essential skill because, let's face it, the text that you're presented with in the book is way more than the text you actually need to put into your brain. Skimming is a great way to get yourself through the monstrous amount of reading you have to do to get the gist or overall idea when the actual small little details aren't quite as important to get. Now, my favorite method of skimming is one that Cal Newport came up with called pseudo-skimming, and this is basically a method where you go through your textbook reading and you skim through the paragraphs looking looking for the specific paragraphs that are more important than the other ones, the ones that hold main ideas, concepts, and the things you need to remember. Once you've identified one of these main paragraphs, then you can slow down and read for comprehension so you can remember what's in it. But for the rest of them, skimming will suffice. When you're pseudo-skimming, a good way to pick out those important paragraphs is to pay attention to the first and last sentences of each paragraph, because those ones will give you an idea of what the rest of the paragraph contains. And to close this video out, the fifth and final tip for improving your reading speed. Hang on. Should we really be talking about reading speed as the metric here, or should we look a little bit broader and be thinking about learning speed as the really important thing? I think that people who want to learn to speed read are often motivated by this desire to become the kind of person who can say, I read 3 books this week. And I think that's the wrong motivation. Reading shouldn't just be an achievement. Like, Goodreads is not an achievement list, and your bookshelf is not a trophy case. By the same token, though, the acquisition of knowledge is also something that can lead you down the wrong path, because in terms of speed reading, I think it encourages us to think of our brains like those ticket machines that take your tickets at an arcade and tell you how many bouncy balls you can get at the prize counter. Our brains don't work that way, but trying to speed read can convince us that they do, and then we're just trying to feed the tickets in faster and faster. That's not how learning works. What about really taking the time to ponder and chew on what you've learned and compare it with your worldview? I think speed readers are constantly concerned with this idea of comprehension, and even if their systems worked, comprehension isn't really the only goal here. The writer Scott Berkun put it better than I ever could.
Reading comprehension does not equal wisdom. Comprehension is for a test. Wisdom is for your life.
So here is the final method. When you read, also take the time to do something with what you just learned. Take notes, write a summary, compare what you learned with your current view of the world, and use that information to do different things and make better decisions. All of this is going to help you more effectively encode the information, have to reread less, and essentially will increase your overall learning speed, which should be the goal. Hopefully some of the methods in this video can help you read faster, but ultimately, it's a matter of your priorities. If you want to read more, stop watching this video and start reading, and then make a habit out of it. If you're still interested in this subject and want somewhere to start, then you can check out the companion blog post for this video, which has some links to other excellent articles on reading, and also you can check out my essential list of books for students if you want some book recommendations. Beyond that, if you enjoyed this video, you can hit the like button to support this channel and let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this final video in my speed reading series. Now if you want to get new videos every single week on being a more effective student, then click that big red subscribe button right there. You can also get a free copy of my book on earning better grades, so if you want one, just click the picture of the book right there. And as I said before, you can find all the notes and links to other articles in the companion blog post by clicking the orange button right there. In last week's video, we looked at some common speed reading techniques, so check it out if you haven't seen it. And if you'd like to connect or ask questions, I'm on Twitter @TomFrankly, or you can leave a comment down below. There comes a time in the life of every student when inevitably they'll lose some very important school file, and then they'll have to make an excuse to their teacher. My flash drive got lost, or my dog ate my homework. Please do not consider the fact that dogs are not allowed in the dorms, that kind of thing. But this is the rule, and you can be the exception to that rule. Now, when I was in high school, I was often a bonehead who would just put my files on flash drives and then inevitably lose those flash drives. But when I got to college, I got my act together, and I can brag truthfully about this. I never once arrived at a class and realized I didn't have an assignment that I needed to bring with me because of the system I built. So in this quick video, I want to show you the system for organizing my files that I built over the 4 years I was in college. We'll talk about the best ways to store your files so you always have access to them, the actual hierarchy of folders I built in my computer so everything was really easy to find, and also ways to organize your paper files. So first, let's talk about file storage. Now, whether you have one computer or multiple computers, I recommend using a cloud storage system. And the one I've been using for multiple years is Dropbox. I absolutely love Dropbox, and their free option comes with 2 gigabytes of storage, which is pretty much good for anybody who isn't going to be doing design or a lot of photography or video work. And they offer apps for almost every platform out there, as well as an app that is accessible through the browser. So keeping your files stored in Dropbox means that even if you forgot to bring your computer to class for some reason, or hey, maybe it's dead, you can go to a computer lab in the building, access the file right on the browser, and print it out. Now, in doing some research for this video, I did some poking into other cloud storage options, and I want to say that Google Drive is also a really strong competitor to Dropbox, and it might even work better for you. Reason being is that Google Docs actually gives you 15 gigabytes as opposed to Dropbox's 2, so it's a heck of a lot more free storage, and it also integrates really well with Google's other products. So if you already use Gmail or Calendar a lot, or you like to write papers collaboratively in Google Docs when you're doing group projects, then Drive is a perfect option. Whichever one you choose will give you the option to organize folders however you like, and I'd like to submit my own system as something that will work really well for you. So in my top level Dropbox directory, I've got multiple folders that each represent different areas of my life, and everything related to school goes into my college folder. My next level folder separates everything by year, and after that, I have everything separated by class. Inside of individual class folders, I'll usually keep all the regular assignments just sitting there, but projects get their own special folders as well. This well-designed tree structure ensures that I'm always able to find the files I need right away, rather than hunting around a giant jumble of files on my desktop looking for the right exact name. Now, the one thing I'll note here, and this applies to every organizational system you use, is that you have to be constantly vigilant about keeping it in working order. It's easy to initially set up this pristine, well-oiled system, but then when you're working on an actual paper and maybe you need to go to bed or you need to rush off to a class, it's also really easy to save that document straight to the desktop. And over time, doing this will ensure that you're going to have that jumbled mess you wanted to avoid in the first place. So be kind to your future self and make sure you take that extra 30 seconds to find the correct folder for an assignment and also give it a name that makes sense. Speaking of naming files, I know a lot of students will make multiple copies of an assignment because they want to save old versions. And a cool thing about Dropbox and also Drive is it has version history. This means that you can actually log into your Dropbox account and see previous versions of a file that you've worked on. If you find that you've screwed up a file and already saved it, you can actually roll back to a previous version and erase those mistakes. Now let's talk about notes. I actually don't keep my notes in Dropbox, and that's because I took almost all of my notes on Evernote. The structure of my Evernote account is very similar to my Dropbox. I have notebook stacks, which represent areas of my life, and then inside those stacks, there are individual notebooks for classes or different projects, or just places I want to keep notes. As an example, here's my classes notebook stack. I used to have 2 of these, one for current classes and one for old classes. Now all my classes are old, so it's just one. But as you can see, all of my classes are listed here, and in each notebook, you'll find all the notes I took for that class. Evernote also allows you to put tags on your notes, so maybe you want to tag certain notes as lecture notes and other notes as final exam review. This allows you to easily filter through all the notes you have for one class and find what you're looking for fast. Now, Evernote also has other features and uses that can be really beneficial to you as a student, and I actually wrote a blog post featuring many of these uses, which you can find by clicking the card right now or looking down in the description. To round out this video, let's talk about paper notes. So I was kind of a minimalist when I was in college and I didn't want to have too many notebooks in my bag. So I actually got a refillable notebook, which I would use for all my subjects. I divided the notebook with the same colored flags that I've marked up this book with, and when I'd run out of paper in one section, I would just take all the notes out of it and add new paper. The old notes would go into subject-specific folders back in my dorm room, and I always made sure to mark page numbers on them so I could put them back together easily when I was reviewing at the end of the semester. And these folders, in turn, were stored in a black file box that I kept in my dorm room, and I highly recommend getting one of these if you don't have one. So that's it for this video. Hopefully some of these tips will help you become a more organized student, which in turn should help you cut down on stress when the demands of the semester start piling on. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, then leaving a like is much appreciated, and I will see you next week. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this incredibly exciting video about file organization. Yeah, well, if you want to get new videos every single week about being a more effective student, you can click that big red subscribe button right there. I also wrote a book on how to improve your grades, and it's absolutely free, so if you want to get a copy, click the picture of the book and I'll send you one. You can find notes and a summary of this video by going to the companion blog post of the orange logo right there, and if you missed last week's video, we talked about Marcus Aurelius' thoughts on self-discipline, and a lot of people liked that one, so definitely check it out. Lastly, if you've got questions or just want to connect with me, I'm Tom Frankly on Twitter, or you can leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. If you spent any time at all on YouTube looking for study advice, then you've probably come across this video called Study Less, Study Smart. Now, this is a recorded lecture from Professor Dr. Marty Lobdell, who is a former psychology professor at Pierce College and wanted to give his thoughts on how to be an effective student. And the video came out when I was a sophomore in college, and I wanted to watch it, but the problem was it was an entire hour long, and I could just never make the time. Now, I've seen a lot of students say the exact same thing about the video, so what I want to do with this video is try to give you about 80 to 90% of the value packed within the lecture in about 1/10 of of the time. So to do that, I first watched the lecture myself and took detailed notes on it. And if you want those notes, I've actually included them at the end of this video. But first, let's get into the tips. So tip number one is to break your studying into chunked sessions. And the reason for this is that the average student can only really pay attention for about 25 to 30 minutes. And this goes across the board from lectures to reading to studying. After about 25 to 30 minutes, your efficiency starts to really taper off. And that's why the advice to simply study more is not effective at all. Instead, you want to break your study sessions into about 20 to 30 minute chunks. And after those are done, take 5-minute breaks where you do something fun or at least away from your studies. And also, once your study sessions are done for the entire day, you want to give yourself a real tangible reward for doing it. As Dr. Lobdell says in the lecture, reinforcement of positive things builds good study habits. And as an added benefit, you're training yourself to study. So as you keep doing this, you're going to be able to study for longer and longer on each session. Tip number two is to create a dedicated study area. And the reason for this is that our environment, the context that we're in, largely determines our behavior. So think about when you're in class. When the professor presents a question to the entire class, you instinctively raise your hand. But if he asks you specifically, you're going to give a verbal response. And this is automatic. You're conditioned to do it. Well, your studying area is the exact same. If you do it in a place where you're conditioned to do other things like sleep or play video games or hang out with friends, it's going to be really hard to get into your studying. What you want to do is find an area that is specifically used for studying. So the context of the situation makes it easy for you to get into your studies. Dr. Lobdell's third tip is to study actively. And it's best summed up with this quote straight from the lecture. The more active you are in your learning, the more effective you'll be. Now, the best way to do this, rather than going through rote memorization or reading and rereading chapters from your book, is to first ask yourself before studying, what is it that I'm learning? And what you're learning is going to fall into one of two categories, either facts or concepts. A concept is something like, what does this particular bone in the human body do? You have to understand it. And a fact is just something you need to remember, what the name of this bone is. Now, concepts are more important than facts because once you learn a concept, once you truly understand its inner workings, it's with you forever. You're going to remember it. Facts, on the other hand, can sort of drift away over time. And the good thing about that is that we have Google. We can look up facts very easily. Now, unfortunately, in a testing situation in class, you have to remember both facts and concepts, and you don't have access to Google usually, but still, concepts are going to be more important to learn first. Now, the best way to learn these concepts and to be sure you know them is to put them in your own words. Test yourself and learn actively. And there's one thing he gives as an example, which I think is one of the most important parts from the entire lecture, and it's his example about highlighting. Now, most students know not to highlight entire sections of the book because if you do that, you're basically highlighting nothing at all. But if you highlight really important terms and then you go back after your first read and highlight session and study them and just simply recognize the thing you highlighted before and say, ooh, I know it, then you're getting into this dangerous territory where you don't know whether you're actually recalling something or simply recognizing it. Now, the human brain is very good at recognizing things. We can recognize people's faces even if we haven't seen them in a long time. But the difference between recognition and recollection is that recognition requires an initial trigger, a cue. And if you're in a test, there is no trigger or cue. You have to actually pull it forth from your memory. So to test and make sure that you're actually recalling something instead of just recognizing it, you need to quiz yourself. You need to do active studying and active learning. The fourth tip is to take more effective notes, and he's really brief on this one. Basically, he says, after class, as soon as possible, and truly as soon as possible, flesh out your notes a bit. Add some more to them so you can actually solidify the concepts in your mind. And if you're fuzzy on something, ask another classmate who also took good notes, or go to office hours or wait to the next lecture and ask the professor before he starts if he can clarify something that you don't really have a good grasp on. The fifth tip is to summarize or teach what you learn, and he says the best way to actually learn something is to teach it, and the reason for this is twofold. Number one, it's a great form of active studying because you're forcing your brain to recall all the information so you can basically summarize it for somebody, and number two, you're really making sure that you fully understand the subject. If you're explaining it to somebody who has absolutely no idea about the topic and they're coming at it from a beginner's perspective, then you're really going to have an easy time of pinpointing gaps in your own understanding. Tip number 6 is to use your textbooks correctly, and in this part of the lecture, he goes over the SQ3R method, which stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. And as I talked about in my active reading video, I think overarching systems like this are actually kind of cumbersome and time consuming, but I do think it's important that you take individual portions of these systems and see if they're worth it for your studying methods. So as an example, the survey portion of SQ3R, surveying the chapter before you read it, and especially going to the end and looking at the review questions and the vocabulary can really prime your brain for picking out the most important information when you actually do the reading. And Dr. Lobdell's seventh and final tip is to use mnemonics when studying facts. Now, facts, as opposed to concepts, are a lot harder to tie actual meaning to, and as a result, a lot of students often turn to simple rote memorization to remember them. But a better way to go about it is to use mnemonics. And a mnemonic is really any system that facilitates recall, but he goes over 3 specific types of mnemonics in the video. And those 3 are acronyms, things like Roy G. Biv for remembering the color spectrum, coined sayings, things like in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and the third one, which both I and Dr. Lobdell think is the best one, image associations. Another way to think about image associations are just interacting images, including the thing you're trying to study, that create a ridiculous picture or story in your head. And the more emotionally evocative or weird it is, the more easily you're going to be able to recall that piece of information. So that is my summary of Dr. Lobdell's lecture. If you want to see the entire hour-long video, I have it linked down in the description. Otherwise, you can get my notes and other things in the end card. Thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end of my video. Now, if you want to get even more study tips, I made a video about advanced study tips last week, and you can see those by clicking the thumbnail. Also, if you want to get new study tips every single week and ways to be an awesome college student, then just click the big red subscribe button right there. As I said in this video, you can get my detailed notes on the entire lecture by clicking the orange button to go to the companion blog post for this video. And also, if you want to become an awesome studier, I wrote a 100+ page book on how to get better grades, and you can get it for free by clicking the picture of the book. Lastly, if you want to connect with me or have ideas for new videos, you can either connect with me on Twitter at TomFrankly or just leave a comment on this video.
Hey, what's up everybody? It's Thomas from College Info Geek, and you ever just wonder, like, how are you gonna get all the information of these crazy huge reading assignments in a freaking weekend? I wanna share a quote with you that I learned over the weekend while doing research for this video, and it goes like this. The mark of a successful college student is the mastery of knowing not only what to study, but also how to study it. And this applies to your readings as much as it applies to anything else in college. So in last week's video, I went over some strategies that you can use to figure out whether or not you actually need to do a reading assignment at all. Now in this video, I want to start focusing on how you should actually tackle the reading assignments that you do need to do. And I have 3 main goals that I want you to keep in mind here. Number 1, you want to learn the right information from your readings. Obviously, you can't learn every single thing in the book, so you want to figure out what is important and get that into your brain. Number 2, you want to retain that information for as long as you can and be able to use it later. And number 3, you want to reduce your study time and the amount of time you have your nose stuck in the book. So to start improving in all of these areas, the first thing that I want you to think about is the why. Why are you doing this reading? Now, a lot of people would say you're reading to learn. And obviously, yes, that's the point of the education. But I think there's another more immediately practical reason that you're doing a reading, and that is how you're going to be assessed on that reading. Being a strategic reader means using different strategies for different reading purposes. And those purposes are defined by the assessments you're going to face in class, which lead back to your immediate goal of earning awesome grades. Now, most students tackle their reading assignments like zombies. They look at the reading assignment and they go, must run my eyes over X number of pages by tomorrow night. That's it. Don't be a reading zombie. Otherwise, your exams are going to turn into a chainsaw. Know what it is that your brain needs to pull out of the reading and focus on that. So here are 4 common reasons that you might do a textbook reading. Number 1, you're going to be facing down a multiple choice test. Number 2, you're going to have to do an essay, actually creating something from scratch in your own words. Number 3 is the evaluation of data in labs, which applies to more technical and scientific majors. And number 4 is the summarization of research for class presentations and reports. The type of assessment that you have to do will dictate what kind of information you need to pull out of your readings. For instance, if you're going to have to do a multiple choice test, then you're going to want to focus on the details of the reading assignments, taking smart, concise notes about all the little things in a class, and then turning those into questions that you can study rapid fire later on. But if you're in a class where you have to write essays, then thorough knowledge of the main ideas is more important, and you're going to want to focus more on summarization and making sure that you can communicate what you learned in your own words. So there's a tip from the video I did last week on figuring out whether or not you even need to do a reading assignment that applies perfectly here as well, and that is to gauge your classes. As the semester goes on, be mindful of what's in the syllabus and what your professor generally uses to assess you, and then apply that knowledge to your readings. Now, this will take practice, but as time goes on, you're going to find that this mindfulness really pays off in the time it saves you and the clarity it gives you when you're looking at your book. So once you've gauged those classes and figured out the type of information you want to pull from your reading, how do you actually go about doing that reading? Well, to start out, let me give you a universal tip that applies to any reading you do, and it's this. Don't read your textbooks like you read a newspaper. People who read the newspaper aren't reading to apply what they're learning. They're just reading to get the gist of the day's events. You're not reading for gists, you're reading for application. Also, don't expect that you're going to learn efficiently by just reading and rereading passages over and over again. The writer Virginia Volk said that how often you read something is immaterial. How you read it is crucial. Think of a book like an art museum. You can walk through the Met in New York 10 times, look at all the paintings each time you go through, and still know next to nothing about any of the art there. You might know the general layout, where certain pieces are, but if I ask you for details, which artist created this painting? Where was this dog thing sculpted? You won't have a clue.
Books are really the same. Passively running your eyes over the pages is like casually strolling through an art museum and not actually studying any of the pieces. It's actually worse because the brain is better at remembering emotionally evocative pictures and imagery than it is at remembering squiggly, arbitrary lines on paper. So instead, try to read in the same way that you'd talk with a friend who challenges you intellectually. You listen eagerly, you contribute your own words to the conversation, and eventually both of you create information that comes together to make something new. This is called active reading, and it's crucial for being able to retain what you learn from your textbooks and be able to apply it later on. In my next video, I'm going to go over a framework of specific techniques that you can try out to start using active reading. But to round this video out, I want to leave you with a technique that you can use to create a small win in your studies. And here it is. Create 2 different habits for your textbook readings. The first one is going to focus on just getting you to read consistently. And the second one is going to focus on getting you to start using active reading instead of passive reading. So the first habit I think you should try out is reading daily. And this might mean planning ahead in advance what you're going to read for a certain week, and maybe even reading some outside material if you finish everything. But it's all about getting into the habit of reading every single day, making it a consistent effort. And for the second habit, try to write down a small amount of notes for each reading you do, or create a small summary for each reading. It doesn't have to be anything large, you just want to get into the habit of doing it and being more actively involved in your reading. Now, with both these habits, you can experiment with making them either input-based or output-based. Input-based habits have a fixed amount of effort that you have to put into them. So read for 15 minutes. That's only 15 minutes of effort and then you're done. On the flip side, output-based habits are based on making something concrete. So write 1 page of notes could be an output-based habit, and the amount of time and effort you need to put into it isn't fixed. Personally, I use both of these types of habits in my own reading. So for my actual reading habit, I use an input-based goal, read for 15 minutes every single day, and then once I've gotten into that, I usually read for longer and I start getting more engaged. And then I use an output-based goal, which is to write half a page of notes on what I'm reading to make sure that I'm actively learning. Whichever type you choose, it's also important to build a small reward into your habit. And getting good grades is a good reward, but it's something that's a little too far off to really count. So I would say find something else that rewards you for getting the reading done every single day. For me, that's ticking off a daily in Habit RPG, which I've made a little bit more valuable by creating a challenge in the College Info Geek Guild. And if you want to join that, you can go to the companion blog post for this video, which you'll find linked down in the description. Otherwise, you could do something else like watching an episode of your favorite show on Netflix, playing a video game, or something else fun. Just make sure that you're building this loop of, here's a cue to do my reading, I'm going to do the reading and take the notes, and then give myself a small reward to reinforce the positive feeling I get from doing that reading. So that's it for this video. If you want to get my tips on active reading, which will come in the next video, then make sure you subscribe to this channel and you'll get those right when they come out. Otherwise, I will see you in that next video. Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, then you can support me by giving it a like on YouTube or sharing it with a friend. If you want to get more videos just like this every single week on being a better college student, then click the subscribe button right there. If you missed the last video, a clip of it is playing right below there and you can click that to watch it. Also, you can get a summary and links to anything I mentioned in the video by going to the companion blog post, which you can find by clicking on the orange logo right there. Lastly, if you want to get a free chapter of my book when it comes out, then you can click that book and subscribe to the College Info Geek newsletter. You'll also get notified when new podcast episodes and blog posts come out every week. Lastly, if you have ideas for new videos or you just want to connect with me, you can do so on Twitter or leave a comment on this video. Thanks! Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Tom from collegeinfogeek.com, and today I want to talk about a study tip that I recently learned when I interviewed somebody for my podcast. Now, the guy I interviewed is named Cal Newport, and if you haven't heard of him, he's written a lot of different books for students that help them be better in college. And there's something he told me that really stuck with me in the interview that I want to share with you. So what Cal told me is, creating things of value requires that you go to intellectual combat. And this is something that I think I intrinsically knew, and you might know yourself, but it's good to have it reiterated, because when you want to create something, when you want to learn something or do something that's difficult, you really have to reach and dive deep and give it the time it deserves. And I think that we don't give this concept enough respect in today's world. I'm guilty of it myself, because I run this blog and I run this podcast and this YouTube channel, and I want to share tools and techniques to make you more efficient. But I think when we're focusing on these time management and task management tools, and we're focusing on study tactics like spaced repetition, method of loci, all this kind of stuff, we don't give creative work and we don't give learning the respect they deserve. They really require concentrated, difficult effort. Learning is reaching, and this is something we need to intrinsically know and understand when we build our schedules. So recently I experimented with a productivity technique called time boxing, and basically what time boxing is you create a minute hour by hour schedule of your entire week, or maybe day, or whatever time period you choose, but you basically plan ahead what you're going to do hour by hour. So I took a Sunday to plan all the content I wanted to create, all the video shooting I wanted to do, editing I wanted to do, blog posts I wanted to write, things I wanted to read, etc. And I actually went hour by hour and said, okay, Monday morning I'm going to write 500 words for this post I'm going to work on, then I'm going to start working on a video, I've got an interview to do, this is all scheduled out. And my intent was that I would be externalizing some of the motivation to do all this work. And I was hoping that I would be more productive because I would have this preset schedule that was driving me forward instead of me having to make a decision every time I finished a task. Now, I knew going into the time boxing experiment that this first week was going to be inaccurate because there's this thing called a fudge ratio. And a fudge ratio is the difference between your mind's estimate of how long it's going to take to do a task and the actual amount of time it does take. And the problem with human brains is we can't differentiate between best case scenario and the average case scenario. So when we estimate the time it's going to take to do something, we think of the average case, like I think on average it's going to take me 15 minutes to get to work. But our minds are actually generating a best case scenario because we don't think of things that can go wrong. And things do go wrong in the real world, and we can't really think about these things that happen beforehand. So hence the fudge ratio, the time it takes beyond your initial estimate. It's also called Hofstadter's Law. So Douglas Hofstadter, the author of a book on my shelf, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and a couple of other books, said that Hofstadter's Law is take your time estimate for something and double it, even if you're taking into account Hofstadter's Law already. So it's kind of recursive and it's humorous, but it does have a good point that you need to take your initial estimates and give it a fudge ratio. Say it's probably going to take me a little bit longer. I tried to implement a fudge ratio into my time boxing experiment, but I knew I wouldn't be perfect. And as I went through, as you can see here on the screen, there are a lot of boxes later on in the week that weren't checked off. And there's a common thread between those boxes. The common thread being these tasks were creative, thought-intensive tasks, and I didn't give them enough time for two reasons. The first one, and the base reason, is I just didn't schedule enough time. I didn't give these tasks the respect they deserved. As somebody who's been writing for about 4.5 years now, I sort of assume that I'm going to be able to create something really, really good in a short amount of time. But when I'm wrangling concepts that I don't know a whole lot about, and when I need to do research and learn, it does take longer. And the other thing is I really sandwiched these creative, thought-intensive tasks between other things, and the other things weren't always perfectly efficient. I might not have gotten something done the exact time that I scheduled it, so it sort of eats into the time that I've already scheduled for the creative task. And as a result, my brain goes, I don't have time to think about, I don't have time to really dive into this creative task. I'm just not going to work on it. And this is something that I learned during the time boxing experiment. So if I do this again, I know going forward that I have to respect the creative tasks. I have to give them the time that they deserve. So here is the best way that you can implement my experience into your own life. Number one, think of your tasks in contexts. There's two different contexts that I see for task management. One is high thought intensity tasks, tasks that really require you to think, buckle down, and reach. And these tasks require a lot of time and dedicated effort, uninterrupted work time. There's also low intensity tasks, things like doing your laundry, going to eat with friends, going to class. There's just things that don't require as much mental reaching. And the best thing that you can do to really set yourself up for success on the high intensity tasks is batch the low intensity tasks. So plan your week ahead in advance. Maybe take Sunday to do a whole week of planning if you can, and think about what are all these low intensity tasks that I need to get done, and how can I squeeze them into as few sections or segments of work as possible. Doing this lets you have open time for the high intensity tasks, time that you need to really dive in and work hard. The other thing you can do is to do regular self-evaluations to see what times of the day you are best primed to do high intensity tasks. So maybe you are a really good morning writer or somebody who can study well in the early morning. Maybe it's early afternoon for you, or maybe you're a night owl and you found that like, wow, it's midnight to 1 a.m. and this is like my on fire time. But be deliberate in paying attention to those times, because when you do that, you can intelligently schedule your classes, your social life, and your work schedule around that to leave uninterrupted blocks of time at those optimal time of the day. And if you notice the awkward jump cut there, well, I kind of forgot the exact lineage, but it works, right? So those are the main ideas in this video. Number one, creating things of value and learning difficult material both require going to intellectual combat, as Cal says. You have to respect the task. You have to give it the time it deserves and don't allow yourself to be interrupted during that work time. The other two ideas are supporting this main idea. Number one, look at your tasks in terms of context and try to batch the low intensity ones. And secondly, try to evaluate what the best times of the day are for you to work. By deliberately implementing these ideas into your life, you're going to be a lot more efficient in your studying and get a lot more done. Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, then you can support me by giving it a like on YouTube or sharing it with a friend. If you want to get more videos just like this every single week on being a better college student, then click the subscribe button right there. If you missed the last video, a clip of it is playing right below there and you can click that to watch it. Also, you can get a summary and links to anything I mentioned in the video by going to the companion blog post, which you can find by clicking on the orange logo right there. Lastly, if you want to get a free chapter of my book when it comes out, then you can click that book and subscribe to the College Info Geek newsletter. You'll also get notified when new podcast episodes and blog posts come out every week. Lastly, if you have ideas for new videos or you just want to connect with me, you can do so on Twitter or leave a comment on this video. Thanks!
Hey guys, it's Practical Psychology here, and I'm going to be doing a collaboration with Creative Vein. Now, I'm going to give more information about his channel at the end of this video, but for right now, let's go over some psychological studying tips. Have you ever pulled an all-nighter for a test, or gone into your room to study and just felt lost on some of the questions? There are times where we just do not study at all or learn correctly, and we have to improve on that. It feels good to automatically know the answer to questions, and even better to get a high grade in a challenging class. I went through most of my high school career just absorbing the information without having to study at all. But now that I'm in college, I have to prepare and actually work on my own time to earn my grades. Today we're going to be going over 8 psychological study tips to help you study more and learn quicker. So tip number 1 is to use different media. Just as many of you watch my animated videos on book reviews rather than actually reading the book, you should be using different methods of studying. You might have no motivation to read the book, and you might have slower reading skills. So watching a video with the same information will help you greatly more. A study in 2008 states, the more regions of the brain that store data about a subject, the more interconnection there is. This redundancy means students will have more opportunities to pull up all of those related bits of data from their multiple storage areas in response to a single cue. Now, there are many ways you can use this. One very well-known site is Khan Academy, where you can watch videos, complete practice questions, as well as ask people in the community about issues that you've had. This will help you form all kinds of interconnections. A few other examples of switching your study methods are flashcards, YouTube videos, audio exercises, apps such as Quizlet, as well as just studying with friends at library or over Skype. So tip number 2 is to spread studying over time. Many students cram on the last day, and if you're watching this video while cramming, then you can still use this, just less efficiently if you had planned better. Planning is a key component of life and can be applied here. If you have a test on Friday and it's currently Monday, then spread this studying over those 5 days. You will have much less stress, much less work each day, and will actually remember it better because each day you're only working on a certain sector of the chapter, leaving more room for intense focus. It might seem counterintuitive, but for most people you'll be better off studying a few chapters a day instead of all 5 at once. You have to be self-aware though. You could be in the slight category where this doesn't work for you. You just have to know how you learn best. The same idea applies to essays. Instead of writing it all in one day, staying up until 3 in the morning, each day of the week write 1 paragraph. And instead of 3 hours in one day, you'll get it done with 30 minutes a day, and you'll also probably earn a higher grade. Tip number 3 is to connect what you're learning with something you know. Now this is a key tip, and I found it absolutely fascinating in my life. Whenever I had related an idea in class to something outside of my life, I would remember it because I knew it could be actually applied to my life, rather than being something trivial that wouldn't amount to anything in my life. For instance, in biology we learned that energy can never be created or destroyed, but it could be transferred and changed from one form to another. Now I just had finished reading a book on how any obstacle can be turned into an advantage. So negative energy was actually a good thing, because you actually had something that you could convert into positive energy. So the same idea held true in biology and the same in my life. As an example, if you're angry, it's good that you have that energy because you can use it to work out. Now there's many ideas in science, history, English, and math that apply in real life situations. Think about how history repeats itself, or how you can use the English language to communicate more effectively as a leader. Or even if you own a business, how good you have to be with numbers to succeed. Another interesting yet useful example is to form any connection possible. For example, my brother was studying for his states and capital tests in the 5th grade. Now I taught him that Florida looked like a tallywhacker. I then told him what tallywhacker meant, and then he connected the tallywhacker idea to Tallahassee. And to this day, he still remembers what the capital of Florida is. It doesn't matter if it's politically incorrect or crude or whatever. If it works, it works. And that's what's going to get you a good grade on the test. Just, don't write Tallywhacker as the capital of Florida. Tip number 4 is to test yourself. Now this is self-explanatory. If you quiz yourself and you do well, the confidence will lead to a higher grade. And if you do not do well, it will show you where you need to improve. Basically, it's going to help you be more self-aware. Now there are many ways you can do this, one of which is searching up practice tests online. And I did this when I studied for my driving test. You can also look at questions in textbooks as well as quizzing yourself with friends. There is no excuse to not do this as there are so many resources on the internet. Using this, you will see what you are strong at and you won't waste time studying the things you already know. Now, of course, studying to begin will help with interconnection in your neurons, but there's no need to waste energy. Again, Quizlet is a great site to visit for this in a pinch. Also, when you type in the initial questions and answers on Quizlet, this will also greatly help. Tip number 5 is to get sleep. I get it. If you're cramming right now or if you've pulled all-nighters in the past, then it may pay off once in a while. There might be once in a semester you actually end up with a B. However, as a general rule of thumb, you want to be getting a minimum of 7 hours of sleep a night to function properly. It's actually super important to your health. If you're not getting enough sleep, your IQ actually drops, if tested, as you're not able to think as quickly and your mental age drops. Now this can snowball into more stress, lower grades, and even less sleep in the future. If you sleep 4 hours a night consistently, you will burn out. It not only leads to being miserable, which is horrible in this short life, but it also leads to gaining fat and becoming less and less energetic. Now there's a rumor that Einstein slept 10 hours a day and had daytime naps as well, showing even that a genius needs sleep. The next tip is to sit at the front. Those that sit in the front are almost always get high grades than those in the back. In some classes where you're seated alphabetically, you can even ask the teacher if you can sit in the front because you can't see very well. It may be the stereotype that the worst students sit in the back, or it's just the fact that it's harder to concentrate when you're not being watched by a teacher. However, if you want to use statistics to your advantage, pick a seat in the front. If this is not possible for some reason, which is very rarely the case, then listen closer in class. This is more important than studying in many subjects, as the teacher is the one who makes the test, and will give tips inadvertently or purposely, allowing you to know what is important for the test and what is not. Asking the teacher questions throughout the class will also raise your learning retention rate. Tip number 7 is to use study breaks. Now for me, studying gets unproductive if I try to focus for too long, which is why cramming is ineffective after a while. You have to take breaks. What I like to do is break my work into chunks. For example, if I have to read 20 pages of a textbook one night, I will break this into chunks of 5 pages each, focus super intensely, and then take a 5-minute break in between each chunk. This allows me to enjoy the process and not see it as a daunting task of reading 20 pages in one sitting. Unless, of course, there are some occasions where I really enjoy reading and I just can't put the book down. However, this is not usually the case for most school readings. It has been proven that after 45 minutes your focus will begin to decline, but after a 5-minute break of walking, stretching, getting that blood moving, you will have enough energy to continue another 45 minutes of studying. And if you want a more scientific approach to this method, check out the Pomodoro technique. Tip number 8 is to work out. Now this is more of a lifestyle tip. However, your entire lifestyle is more important than one test. Similar to sleeping, exercise gives you energy to enjoy life. I'd rather enjoy life and do well for the most part, probably messing up on one test rather than cramming for a test, feeling drained for the next few days than not having good habits. Working out makes you feel good about yourself. And I'm not saying that unhealthy people are bad people. However, if you want to do well in dating, social situations, and have more confidence, then having a fit body will help you dramatically. Now that we have those 8 psychological studying tips out of the way, the key is to apply them at your life one at a time. And not only your grades, but your entire lifestyle will change for the better as well. I want to say that this was another collaboration video with Creative Vein, and he has some amazing videos like this on his channel. In fact, he created most of the script for this video. I highly recommend you go check out his videos. If you want to see the first collaboration we did together, here's the 8 first impression tips. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed.
I got a question from a student recently that I think really highlights a problem that a lot of us have. And the problem is this: we think that we can't get the motivation to do something when in reality we're simply not willing to get the motivation to do it. So I want to read you this question real quick and give you my thoughts on it, and hopefully it'll help you if you're having your own motivational problems. So he says, one of the biggest problems I've been having is the struggle to see the consequences of not studying or not doing an assignment until the last possible second. And by last, I mean really last.
I really need to be getting onto these things earlier, but I just can't bring myself to do it. I try to imagine the way it would feel to have it done, or even the consequences of not doing it, which is always a lower grade than I want. I've just found myself lying around, doing nothing, or literally doing anything else that I could possibly do besides actually working. So one thing he also mentioned in his email is he liked the method I use to force myself to wake up in the morning, how I schedule a tweet to go out at 6:10 that'll give people $5 if I don't wake up on time to delete it. But he said also that he's not willing to put money on the line and that he doesn't have Twitter. And it's really highlighted to me that he has the ability to set these systems up. It's very easy to set up a Twitter account, and it's very easy to pony up $5 to do something that's really going to benefit your life. But at this point, he wasn't willing to actually do it. So really, in my mind, this highlights the difference that I mentioned earlier. It's not that he can't motivate himself to do something, it's that he's, as of yet, been unwilling to set up the systems to create that motivation. Now, your motivation to do something that will help you in the long term has to compete with your impulses to do other things at the same time, which means that motivation is determined by a few different factors. Mainly, there's the desire to get the reward for doing that thing. You want to get a good grade in a test, so you have to study for that test. But there's also the possible consequences for not doing that thing. The pain that you'll bring upon your future self if you don't get this thing done. But there's also the impulse to get into other activities, to go on Reddit, to go on Facebook, to hang out with your friends, or go on a Netflix binge. These are always competing with your motivation in the moment. So essentially, you have to find ways to tweak each of these values in order to generate the right amount of motivation to get yourself to do whatever it is you're not currently doing. And here's the key insight here. You can build systems to create that motivation. You can build a system that creates heavier consequences for not doing what you're supposed to do. Or you can build systems that give you ancillary rewards in addition to the main reward that's given by the task. You can also set up systems that make it harder to get into those distractions. You can find apps that will block the websites that you don't want to be distracting yourself with. Or you can go to the library so you're not near your friends when they decide they want to go bowling. Now, all these are things that you can do. So the problem isn't that you can't motivate yourself. It's that right now you're unwilling to lay the groundwork and build the systems in order to generate that motivation. The pain or discomfort of not doing what it is you're supposed to be doing has not yet become great enough that you've decided to make a change in your life. This reminds me of a comment that I got recently on that video about my wake-up system. Somebody said that basically it's ridiculous. Nobody should have to threaten themselves to get up on time or to pursue their goals. And yeah, in an ideal world, I agree with that. Ideally, we would be able to generate the motivation we need to do the things that are going to benefit us in the long term. That's what long-term thinking is all about. But we don't live in a perfect world. We don't live in an idealized world where we're always looking to the future. We live in the real world. We live in a world where our impulsive desires in the moment are often the things that rule our minds. So we have to work within those parameters, work within those limitations, and create systems that can help us overcome those impulsive desires. So the question to ask yourself is simple. Have you actually done all that's in your power to create systems to generate motivation? When you tell yourself that you just can't get the motivation to study or do your homework, are you being honest with yourself? Or in reality, are you just not willing to put in that groundwork? Are you not willing to build those systems to create the motivation? If that's the case, then look at what you've been doing in the past to create that motivation. If it's not sufficient, then it's time to make a change. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this quick video on motivation. Now if you found it useful, leaving a like can really help this channel out, and you can also get new videos every single week on being a more effective student by clicking the big red subscribe button right there. I also wrote a book on how to earn better grades, which also includes some more tips on how to beat procrastination. So if you want to get that, it's absolutely free. Just click the picture of the book and I'll send you a copy. You can find a summary of this video along with some links to extra resources at the companion blog post, which you can access at the orange logo right there. And if you missed last week's video, we talked about how I organize my files, notes, and other school projects. So if you want to see my folder system, click the thumbnail to watch it. If you have questions or want to connect with me, I'm on Twitter at TomFrankly, or you can leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.